Okay, thank you everyone for your attendance here this evening. This is the Planning Committee being held on the 16th of November 2022. I do appreciate we're running 10 minutes late. There was just, we know the traffic's bad in the area and we know quite a few residents are still due on the East Tilbury application. So we just thought we'd give them a little bit more time. But what we're going to do, we'll just change the order. There's only 2 items on the agenda here this evening. So we'll go to the Hollies first and then move on to East Tilbury. Just so it gives residents time to arrive. With that, we'll then go on to apologies for absence. So apologies for absence. Kenna, do you have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Polly.
Okay, thank you. And I don't believe we have a sub, do we? We didn't have one available, so that'll be hopefully seven members here this evening. And I understand Lee Watson will be here shortly. She's also stuck in traffic. Okay, so with that, we're looking at items of urgent business. I've not agreed to any items of urgent business. I've discussed with Lee this evening just an idea running into April. I know in previous years we've had a few issues with applications that jump election cycles, so we will discuss an application in April, we'll then have an election cycle, the committee will change based on those elections, yet the application's still live and only the original councillors can still vote. So we're going to look at seeing if there's anything we can do with the April date, see if we can bring that forward a bit, just so we can have an extraordinary meeting at the end of April, just so we can tidy everything up so you can go into a new election cycle fresh. Just an idea at the moment, just keep an eye on your emails, it may come to fruition. Okay, so with that we'll then go on to declarations of interest. 2 items on the agenda. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's not actually on the applications themselves, but I would just like to point out and bring to the committee's attention that there was a press article yesterday on Thurrock Nub News that said about a site visit to the Ilk development in Stanfordley Hope. It showed a picture. I wasn't actually at that visit. I've never attended that site, so I wasn't shown in the photograph, but my name was mentioned in the article.
Okay, thank you. Kenna, just quickly. Okay, thank you. Just bear with us. We'll see if we can get those speakers on the back for you. Okay, hopefully we've increased the volume. If everyone could just make sure you speak clearly into your mics so people at the back can hear. Is that better? Okay, excellent. So, yeah, nice clear speaking here this evening, ladies and gentlemen. All right then, that's declarations of interest. We now move on to declarations of receipt of any correspondence. There has been a few emails going around. I think, first of all, I received one from an Ian Anderson and a James Bompass in relation to the East Tilbury application. That's land adjacent to the rear of George and the Dragon. And I think that most of those emails was everyone CC'd in on those? Yeah, okay, so we've received those. And I also received an email from a Mick Francis in relation to the Hollies, Rectory Road. And again, I think that was around. Now, was there any other declaration, any other receipts? Thank you, Paul. Councillor
Yeah,
Arnold?
I think the Hollies, I think I actually received one from Mark Watts. I just made a note of that.
Okay, Mark, what? Jimmy?
Same again, I've got the same email as well.
Brilliant. Okay, all right then. And I think a few other members have received that. Okay then, right. So going on to planning appeals, looking at found on pages 5 to 16 on the agenda. Are there any comments on these planning appeals? Anything? And John, do you have anything to say, or would you like to comment on any of the appeals? Thank you.
Yeah, the report is for noting, but members will know we had a pretty successful November turnout with appeals, with 11 appeals and only 4 allowed. So it was a good month then, and the percentages have gone down. Interestingly, on the agenda, there's an item, on the appeals agenda, there's an item for Talford, Horndon Road, which was a Greenbelt application. The inspector found a modest extension of 10 square metres to be inappropriate development, so dismissed that appeal. But there's quite a variety of decisions on there, a number dismissed, but yet some progress in terms of more appeals being dismissed than allowed.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for John? No? Okay, all right, thank you. Moving on to item 6, which obviously allows us to discuss other items on the agenda here this evening. We only have 2. That's land adjacent to the rear of George and the Dragon, and the Hollies, Rectory Road. And as discussed, we'll discuss that one. And Matthew, I understand that you'll be presenting both applications here this evening. So with that, we'll start with agenda item 8, the Hollies Rectory Road. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If you bear me a second, with any luck, I can share my screen. Which is... Okay, hopefully you're seeing what I'm looking at, which is a introductory slide. Okay.
Okay, so just thank you. Councillor Watson, you've arrived just in time. The presentation's just about to start. We're discussing the Hollies first on the basis that I think we're still waiting for a few residents for East Tilbury. So, excellent. The timing was really good there. And if we could just speak into the mic loudly and clearly, just for the benefit of the members and agents and residents at the back of the chamber. Over to yourself, Matthew. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Watson's got even more time because I need to click through all these slides before I get to the... So there we go. You've got ages, don't worry. Okay, we're ready. There's no items of housekeeping for this one. Officers haven't received any late letters or any late correspondence over and above what's reported on the agenda. So that's the site. So it's quite an irregularly shaped site. Hopefully you can see my cursor there. So it's in the centre part of Allsit. You've got the Whitmore Arms Public House to the south. Mainly residential properties off there to the north and to the west. And if I show a Google Maps image, again you can see its location there, with open land off to the east and to the southeast as well. Now, in terms of constraints, it's worth walking through because it's a little bit complicated, this one. So this is the site here. Follow my cursor, drops down, up there, round, across and back down again. There's an existing sort of 4/5 bedroom detached residential property, which is in a location here. In fact, this image is slightly out of date because it's been extended off there to the off to the east. That is within the conservation area. So that on that top image there, the purple semicircle hatching is the extent of the conservation area, and then off to the east on the green, no surprise, no guessing there, that's a greenbelt allocation. So the residential curtilage, if you like, which is the house and the accompanying land and the garden, is partly in the conservation area, partly in the greenbelt. The image on the southern side there shows listed buildings which are fairly close by. So in the darker orange notation there, you've got 4 or 5 listed buildings which are to the west of this particular property. final thing to mention, there's a public right-of-way, a public footpath. My cursor's a bit jumpy, so you'd have to bear with me. It runs basically along the southern edge of the site and then pops out on the southern part of, on the southern boundary of the Whitmore Arms. That's a public right-of-way, public footpath. That's the existing site plan. So that's the extent of the existing dwelling, and there's a swimming pool, an open swimming pool, and you've got notations for existing trees. Obviously, access is off there to the west. And in terms of the existing dwelling on site, it's probably an 80s build, and you can see the arrangement of the floor space there. So that image on the top is flipped through 90 degrees, fairly conventional vernacular. You know, pitch-tiled roof, mixture of brick and render, I think it is, and you can see the internal accommodation on the top image there. What's being proposed is a replacement, in essence. So there's quite a lot going on in this drawing. But basically the pink notation there, which is a sort of E shape, if you like, is the proposed new dwelling. You won't be able to make out too well on the drawing, but there's a dotted line in blue, sort of in a position there, which is the existing dwelling, which would be removed. Also within the description of the development is the relocation of the swimming pool, so it would go from a position there to a position there. Technically speaking, it is development. It would probably qualify as development under the Town and Country Planning Act. In terms of proposed plans, accommodations over 2 levels. You would have read from the report it's quite a substantial amount of built floor space and footprint and volume being proposed in comparison with what is there on the site at the moment. And in terms of proposed elevations, I think I've just got the one slide here which shows you what's being proposed, and you can make out, you'll get an idea of the design, the external appearance and the finishing materials. On to a few pictures. So that's the site entrance, that would be sort of looking northeast. And then looking from the other direction out towards the entrance, so the actual existing dwelling house is behind where that picture's taken from. That's the existing dwelling. That's taken from the eastern boundary of the site, looking west. So the existing dwelling, this dwelling here is actually a neighbouring dwelling. So the Whitmore Arms would be off on the left-hand side on that particular image, and the open area you'll see here is that part of the site which is within the green belt, and you make out the existing swimming pool, which is that feature just there. There's no built enclosure around it, it's just a sunken swimming pool. And a slightly different view looking northwest, so the public footpath would be off on the left-hand side. Again, that's just to demonstrate the existing dwelling, which is within the conservation area, and because of the way the boundaries work, the garden, you can see there in the swimming pool, is within the green belt. These pictures were taken very recently, as you can probably tell from the changing colour of the leaves. They're taken from the public right-of-way, so from the public footpath to the south, looking basically northwards in towards the site. So that's to demonstrate that the site is visible from a public vantage point. I'll run through the issues. Obviously, they're set out in considerable detail within the report. The replacement dwelling would be located in the greenbelt. So I've spelled that out, and you've seen that from the plans. So that being the case, the usual tests apply. So that's national policy tests, and your own development plan policies apply. So the first consideration is whether or not a replacement dwelling house is acceptable in terms of appropriate development or not. Now, there is a part of the MPPF, paragraph 149, which refers to at subsection D, the replacement of the building can be appropriate, provided that, and I'm quoting directly, it does not result in disproportionate additions over and above the size of the original building. Now, it's also fair to say that the original building has been extended. So what you've seen on those plans and the photographs wasn't the original building, it's been partly extended. So it's about whether or not there would be disproportionate additions. If it's considered there are, therefore it's inappropriate development. There's a comparison of existing and proposed floor space, footprint, volume set out at paragraph 611 of the report. And we've concluded that on that numeric calculations, you're talking about an increase in footprint of above 60%, an increase in floor space of around about 73.5%, and there's about an 85% increase in volume. We consider that to be disproportionate compared to what was originally on the site. Therefore, the replacement wouldn't be appropriate. It has to be defined as inappropriate development. Inappropriate development in the Greenbelt is by definition harmful. That is what national policy tells us as a matter of fact. It being in the Greenbelt, obviously Greenbelt is about openness and permanence. We consider that there's harm to that openness, both in terms of the spatial characteristic of openness and also the visual characteristic of openness. Obviously, there's that public right-of-way to the south, so the site is at least partially visible, depending on the time of year and the tree cover, from a public right-of-way. So that it's putting a disproportionately large replacement building on a publicly visible site would harm openness. You'll be aware in terms of the Greenbelt balance, it's then about, are there considerations, other factors, benefits which clearly outweigh the harm, and I'm emphasising the word clearly because that's the policy test. Nothing has been brought forward in the application, no special considerations have been offered. So we've concluded therefore that that harm isn't clearly outweighed. It's inappropriate development in the Greenbelt and therefore it fails on that policy test. So that forms a reason for refusal. The second main issue for you to consider is, again, part of the site's in Alsip Conservation Area, part of it isn't, but part of it is. And the council has a statutory duty under the Planning Listed Building Conservation Areas Act 1990, section 72, and it basically says that when we're exercising our functions, we need to pay special attention to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of that area, i.e. that conservation area. The advice we've had from our heritage advisor is that the proposal would foul that test, and that's a legal test, if you like, under the Act. It's therefore contrary to section 72 of Planning Listed Building Conservation Areas Act. In terms of the MPPF, how that works is it looks about harm and how it grades harm to a heritage asset. Now, the heritage advisor concludes that there'd be less than substantial harm. So what the MPPF then requires local planning authorities to do is basically another balancing exercise. And where a proposal would lead to less than substantial harm, the harm needs to be weighed against any public benefit. So are there benefits, wider benefits, which would outweigh that less than substantial harm to a designated heritage asset, i.e. the conservation area? Again, we can't see that there's any public benefit. For example, if there was a listed building, heritage asset, which has fallen into disrepair, and you wanted to bring that building back into beneficial use, that could be argued as a public benefit. You know, there's an example of the Grey State not far behind us. And that's an example where that would engage. So, as an example, if works were proposed to that to bring it back into beneficial use, that could be an argument because there would be wider public benefit. We don't think that applies in that particular case, so that would form a second reason for refusal in terms of harm to the heritage asset, i.e. Alsip Conservation Area. Briefly on other issues, we don't consider there's any overriding impact on adjoining residential amenity. We don't think there is any highways implications for it. But on the main issues, Greenbelt, an impact on the conservation area, there is demonstrable harm, there aren't public benefits, and there's no special considerations which would clearly outweigh that harm. So the recommendation before you is to refuse planning permission. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that presentation then, Matt. That then takes us into questions. Just sort of the first question I was thinking, and in a sense it might not be relevant, but would it be acceptable, do you think, if it wasn't in the green belt, or would it still be sort of considered quite excessive, or ultimately we're not sure what your conclusion would be if it wasn't constrained by that conservation area and the fact that it breaches into the green belt, or it could be down to judgment again? Thank you.
It would be a less complicated judgment because the greenbelt consideration is a point of principle. It's either appropriate development or it's not. And if it's inappropriate, you need that harm clearly outweighed. That doesn't apply. If that was in the urban area on a substantial plot, let's say, and somebody wanted to replace a house and increase the floor space, as long as there was no harm to the prevailing character of the area, no harm to adjoining amenity, it could perfectly well be acceptable. In this particular case, you've got a greenbelt constraint and you've got a conservation area constraint. So that's the issue.
Okay, thank you. Open up to questions. Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Matt, for such a great presentation. One of my questions I want to ask, now, on one of your slides, this garden is between a conservation area and it's got a green belt going right through it, so half it is green belt. The new build looks like it's been pushed back into, if you look at it looks like from the existing, the new build would be further into the garden. So the new build itself, what proportion of that new build would be sitting in greenbelt and what would be in conservation? And the second question is, in some points in conservation building, is that you can build on a conservation land, but it has to have certain elements of the build. For instance, I know English heritage land, which is conservation land, you can build on it, but it has to be in a certain standard of, it might have to have leaded windows instead of normal PVC windows, and it has to look a certain way. Is that sort of part of this planning as well, that it has to be structured into a certain planning requirement?
Can I take your last point first? Heritage assets include a range of stuff. So certain types of garden, for example, historic battlefields. We haven't got any in Thurrock, but they can be heritage asset. But the main ones we deal with, listed buildings, conservation areas. With listed buildings, I think that's maybe where you're going, because as long as, I mean, if somebody lives in, let's say, a house which is a listed building, they can do works of repair as long as it's like for like. So if they're replacing a particular roof tile, and as long as they match it, that's absolutely fine. Where listed building consent is required, it's often granted as long as there's attention to detail. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's where you're where you're going. This is a bit conservation areas. So I can't remember how many we've got in the borough, probably 7 or 8, roughly speaking. So they're defined for their architectural or the historic significance, or as a group. So you might get individual buildings in there which are listed because they're of special value, but they work as a whole. They're of a particular character. So example, for Alsip, for example, I haven't got the character area appraised in front of me, but there's a collection of buildings which are historic on the crossroads, on the cruciform. So it's a historic sort of village conservation area setting. And there's basically that statutory duty you should look to preserve or enhance. Now, there's been a legal test, I can remember from donkeys years ago, which is still applicable, It's called the South Lakeland case, whereby preservation can be interpreted as having a neutral. Anything which has a neutral impact can still be found acceptable. It doesn't have to enhance. It can be neutral. Here, the advice from the conservation advisor, and that's what that particular advisor does, they don't do anything else, they just deal with listed buildings and conservation areas, is it wouldn't meet that test. It's a much bigger building. Visually, it's going to have an impact. So I'm putting Greenbelt aside, just in terms of conservation area. It's visible in terms of the public right-of-way, so you could see that building or that extended replacement building in the context of existing buildings in the conservation area, let's say behind it or at an angle. So that becomes a factor we need to consider. I mean, we have to advertise certain development proposals as affecting the setting of a listed building, or more widely affecting the character or appearance of a conservation area. So it's not necessarily standing right in the middle of the conservation area and how does it affect. It's a bit more of an esoteric view about, well, if you were at a public vantage point, public right-of-way, for example, and you would see a building in the context of a wider conservation area, how does that judge? But the ultimate test is preserve or enhance. And the advice we have is this doesn't, because of its, partly because of its size, which is significantly bigger than what's there at the moment. That's a long-winded answer I've given you there. Appreciate, but come back to it. You can.
So, Chair, sorry. So this is you can do that in a sec, right? So the bit I wanted to ask you, this is already built in a what is it? What? Even you can't say it. It's already
area.
Yeah, it's already built in a controversial area.
No, conservation.
You know what I mean, Matt. So if it's already built in there, it must have had planning permission originally.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, you said they can enhance. So if the build was to get bigger where it is now, I know it's not what they're after, is that acceptable then?
Can I come back on those 2 points I missed? I'm just going to hold that because I think I'm going to ask John to advise me when the conservation area was actually designated. Just put you on the spot there because I can't multitask. I'm sorry. So on the question about percentage of the proposal in Greenbelt and then percentage in the conservation area. So what the image you should have on your screen. So you've got that sort of E shape, which is the proposal. I'd probably have to jump back one more slide. But as a basic sort of basic rule of thumb, the Greenbelt part of it, and my mouse is jumping around all over the place, so bear with me, goes up there, dear. It goes up on that western edge. So I would say the vast majority of the proposed dwelling would be in the Greenbelt, with perhaps a slither in the conservation area through there, because that's roughly where the boundary is there. So if I show you on that constraints plan, again, which is not a great, you could probably do it from there. No, actually, it's a bit further over. Sorry, I'm misleading you. I don't want to do that. So I think the boundary, roughly speaking, goes up there. So 2/3 of the building in the Greenbelt, a third in the conservation area. I haven't got a slide showing that overlaid, so you'll have to bear with me. Okay, going back to that other point. The conservation area was designated in '75. Looking at the planning history, I think it was the 83, or there were two, yeah, it's the 83 approval. So at page 70 of the agenda, there's the planning history. I think it's the first one, which was an 83 application for full planning permission. So the existing house, and don't ask me what the policy context was in 1983 because I'm far too young. The conservation area was there 8 years before the house was built. We were working under a different planning act then. That's what I'd say. It would have been the 1971 Act by then. So, bear in mind the passage of time, it was a slightly different policy position. So, that's the factual answer.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, I've got 3 hands raised. I'll go in order to which they were raised. Councillor Piccolo, then Arnold, then Carter. So Councillor Piccolo first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of questions. Do we know what the usage of the footpath that you refer to is like? You know, is it a popular footpath? And would you also agree that probably the footpath is used the most between, say, April and October? You'll get a few die-hard ramblers possibly that will use it in the winter months, but is it common that footpaths are more at their busiest during the summer months?
Right, I'm not being rude looking at my phone, but I've got the public footpath app because I'm like that. So it runs basically from the pub east all the way to the 128 or just before the 128. And I can't see that it particularly links up further. Oh no, it could. Yeah, it could link up further east towards Horndon, but there would be a section on road before you've got choices further east, either north or south, and you could go to Horndon on the Hill. I mean, it's not unheard of for footpaths to be off road and then partly on road, but it's an easterly direction, and then you've got options.
Yeah, but it is.
In terms of usage, brutally frank, I haven't got a clue.
Yeah, but it is a rambler's footpath rather than, well, looking at where it goes from and to, would you say it's more of a rambler's footpath than a footpath that is used by the general public to get from A to B?
Yeah, I'll take your point. It's a recreational footpath.
Thank you. Sorry, just and one other thing. Would you say that my assumption that a recreational footpath is more likely to be used, say, from late April through to the end of September in summer months, rather than during the winter months?
Generally speaking, yeah. I mean, this is purely anecdotal, and you shouldn't put whatever weight you want on it, but I tend to walk footpaths, and it's quite actually nice to go out in the middle of winter when there's nobody around. But I suspect it to be more die-hard in the in the depths of winter when it's probably a bit muddy and a bit wet. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That then takes us on to Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions. And the first one's probably quite simple. Am I correct in assuming that if the applicant had brought to us a scheme where the existing property was enhanced and brought into a sort of a modern energy efficient home, you know, with all of those improvements that you can make these days, but essentially keeping the building same shape and form, maybe with a modest extension, would that even come to committee, or would it need our permission or not? I mean, would that be then a straightforward application? Is it just the fact that this is a very big property moving further back into the site, into the green belt?
This one's been called in in any case. If the scenario was the existing dwelling was retained with extensions, refurbishment, and it needed a planning application, because obviously there are PD rights, but I expect, looking at the history, they've probably been used up. But if the existing dwelling was retained, enhanced, extended, ordinarily that would be a delegated decision. The follow-on from that is the existing dwelling predominantly isn't in the greenbelt, so we haven't got that policy, both national and local policy, to navigate. So it would be a different it'd be a different assessment.
Okay, so in theory, the home could be altered and improved significantly up to modern standards, and it wouldn't be a future issue, or it wouldn't be an issue for us. It's just that the application is for a very, very big home set into the greenbelt. So I think we kind of established that. So I think that's the case, is it?
The conservation area / heritage asset issue would apply.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd still have to consult the heritage advisor, and there'd still be that consideration about would the proposal preserve or enhance character and appearance. So this is let's just say it's an interesting site. The split part conservation area, part greenbelt does make it slightly out of the normal. This one keeps us on our toes and keeps you on your toes.
Okay, well, I'll leave that one there. And my second question is, you might need to delve into your knowledge. I think further up the road, I think it's near Prince Philip Avenue, if I'm remembering correctly, there's quite a nice house being built on the corner plot. It's very large, and I believe it will replace one dwelling. Is that in the conservation zone? Is that in greenbelt?
No, I'm aware of the history of that one. The one on the corner where the wall's been taken down recently. Yep, that's in the residential area, and it's outside the conservation area. So the two tests that Matt's applying on this one don't exist to that one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then that takes us to Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. It's terribly confusing when there's both the conservation area and the green belt, like quite close together. It's hard actually to tell how much is in which with the layout. My question would be, how much of the existing property was in the green belt, or was it completely within the conservation area?
Yeah, I'm thinking whether or not if I jump back to, yeah, that might be better. So again, bear with me on the cursor, because it's and I've actually, oh, there we are. Yeah, I think this one's actually better. I think we've established the boundaries roughly about there, there. So that rectangular part of the existing dwelling, which the cursor's on now, I think is the part we're talking about in the green belt. So everything to the left of that, and the cursor's just dropped again, so bear with me, everything to the left of that, to the west of that, is conservation area.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And I've had Councillor Shinnick, then Councillor Tandy. And then we'll move to speakers' statements. Thank you.
Right, can you just go over, did you say it's partially visible from the footpath?
Yeah, what I'll do, if you bear with me, if I go back to the Google Maps image, right, so that's the existing, there's the public house, and the footpath, if the cursor behaves itself, runs along that tree line. Now, one of my colleagues walked it. Now, you're not walking, the footpath's going to be one side or other of that tree line. So that's where it is in context. If I get to that last couple of pictures. So you've got two views there, which I think were taken either Monday or Tuesday. So that's standing on the public footpath looking towards the site. So the top image, there's clearly a gap somewhere, and you can get a fairly unimpeded view. And the bottom image, again, there's some overhead branches there. So that's, obviously in full summer leaf cover, it would be slightly different. But I'll go back to the point. In terms of greenbelt and openness, you can consider visual, that's fine, if it's there, but it's a spatial designation. In fact, there was a High Court judgment probably 2 years ago where basically the upshot of that, it wasn't High Court, it was Supreme Court, bear with me, so it was top UK court basically. It basically said you don't have to have visual impact for there to be harm, because primarily greenbelt is a spatial designation, it's about keeping land open. So that demonstrates that at least partially there would be a visual impact which would affect openness, but the spatial impact is there regardless.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tandy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just want to know, what's more alarming for the council, to build on conservation area or green belt?
Well, they're both policy designations, and they're both long-standing interest of acknowledging importance. And greenbelt policy has been around basically since the planning started in 1948. And there have been various iterations of the Planning Listed Building Conservation Areas Act. They're both of importance. They achieve different goals, if you like, because one is about heritage and preserving and enhancing heritage, and one is about keeping land open. But they're both important. And on this particular site, they both apply. I don't know if it's quite answered the question, but it's not a case of one should trump the other. They're both rooted in policy, both national and local, and they're both material considerations which you do need to take into account.
Okay then, thank you members for those questions. That then takes us on to speaker statements. Now I have had a late submission from the agent in relation to the Hollies, and on the basis of there being no active letters of objection, I've accepted that late submission, but that's not normally something we do. I'll go over to the first statement, which is a statement of support, and that's Councillor Johnson, who's the ward member. Councillor Johnson, if you'd like to come down, and you've got 3 minutes in which to present your statements. If you just like to use the chair in front of you there, just that one there. Yeah, thank you.
Good evening, Chair and committee members, and thank you for allocating me the time to speak in favour of what I believe is an application that enhances the site and seeks to include a home of significant assistance towards good environmental living, as the construction of the existing property from the 1980s is not efficient in its consumption of energy. And as a ward councillor for Orsett, it is something that I would like to see all residents aspire to live, if at all possible. The report suggests that this application is harmful to the openness of the Greenbelt, but I would ask the committee to question why or how can we accept that a rear garden space of a residential property could be regarded as being so, when the space in question is provided with its own form of hedging and fencing anyway, along with its own tree and shrub planting and outbuildings, which, as you see, also includes a swimming pool. With reference to the conservation area, I am led to believe that the original application did in fact receive a letter of support from the Orsett resident tasked with ensuring such proposed developments do not have a negative impact on the conservation area and its assets. I go further, as indeed the report itself states that no public objections have been received, with all the highways, ecological and archaeological reports having no objections either, with the only comment made by the heritage advisor being less than significant harm might be caused by the development. The design has been developed in such a way as to provide separation and privacy from the annex, whilst at the same time offering internal connection. And with this in mind, I would ask the committee to question why the report suggests that the application is one of a sprawling design. I would go as far as to say that this design has been deliberately used to see the proposed redevelopment being moved further away from both the listed buildings and the centre of the conservation area itself. And with the new roof line being the same height as the existing roof line, I fail to understand how this application might have any negative impact on either the openness of the greenbelt or the conservation area. I agree that each and every application should be judged on its own merits, but when all said and done, an application that looks to replace one existing property with another that includes the benefits of a residential annex for ageing relatives within the existing curtilage of the existing property that also looks to offer good environmental accommodation should be encouraged rather than refused. However, committee, if you do not feel you have enough evidence this evening, I do believe a site visit may give you a much better feeling for the site and its use. As proven today, most of the public view would be only by peering in between trees on the footpath. So I thank you again for allowing me this time to speak, and I would request that the recommendation to refuse this application is reconsidered, as I do not consider it inappropriate use of the green belt. Thank you, committee.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Johnson, for your statement there. And then that also takes us on to another statement of support, and this is from Simon Burke, who's the agent for this application, if you'd like to come forwards. And you two have 3 minutes in which to present your case. Please press the button in front. Excellent.
Good evening, everyone. It seems that our application has generated a reasonable amount of concern from the Planning Department, and we would wish to address the principal concerns as follows. The suggestion that the site is greenbelt land came as a surprise, not least because of the recognised characteristics of greenbelt land being one of openness in the form of agricultural land and open countryside, which was lost 20 to 30 years ago when the land became enclosed form for domestic use as domestic garden, and indeed this was formalised in 2006 and presently is laid out to a well-maintained garden with ornamental garden planting and a swimming pool. It does appear that an arbitrary line has been drawn on a map through the Garden of the Hollies representing a boundary between the settlement of Orsett and greenbelt land. However, the Hollies appears to be the only property that has its garden half inside and half outside the settlement boundary. Section 13 of the NPPF relating to the protection of greenbelt land, paragraph 143, relating to defining greenbelt boundaries, is worth a read. Each point would call into question why the Hollies garden would be regarded as greenbelt. And in this instance, item F is very relevant as it states boundaries should be clearly defined using physical features that are readily recognisable and likely to be permanent. We believe the legitimacy of the boundary position and land designation should be questioned. From the outset, it was recognised that the impact of the conservation area would be our principal concern, and much negativity has been conveyed within the officer's report relating to the sprawling nature of the design. But this has been deliberate and has enabled the larger part of the proposed development to be concealed behind a modest front facade, which is also located in excess of 14 metres further away from the centre of the conservation area and Rectory Road. We would argue that the impact of the new house is less as a result of this arrangement, and by moving the house further back into the site, we would have the opportunity to provide a front garden area allowing for soft landscape planting rather than a large expanse of hard paved areas that we presently have. And this should also be seen as a positive when the house is glimpsed from Rectory Road. The replacement house is larger than the existing house, but we believe the design is of a traditional form and proposed with traditional materials such as slate roofing and rendered exterior walls. The house would also be constructed with a fabric significantly superior to the existing 1980s construction. We intend to replace existing gas-fired boiler system with heat pumps and with a building fabric that, to use a comparison, would replace existing 50mm cavity masonry walls with 200mm cavity masonry walls. In short, this proposal represents a rare opportunity within the settlement of Orsett to replace an existing house with something better that will also provide annex accommodation for ageing relatives with associated parking. If the committee members are of any doubt about the land use or impact, we would encourage deferment to allow for a meeting on site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that statement. All right then, so that's speaker statements done. Now, before we head into debate, was there any further questions based on those statements? Councillor Arnold.
I'm very sorry. Something I may have misheard, I may have misinterpreted. Please correct me if I am wrong. Am I correct in thinking, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the land at the back has basically been fenced off and then title has been given to that house in 2006?
Chair, if you look at the planning history, and my colleagues might want to chip in, my planning colleagues might want to chip in as I see fit. But on page 71, in the table, the fourth entry down, you've got a reference 06-1147 LDC. That was an application for a lawful development certificate, which is something new, it's a certificate of lawfulness basically. And looking at that, and I haven't got the paperwork in front of me, but I would imagine that the householder at the time extended their curtilage, fenced off a bit of land, okay? Ordinarily that would require planning permission. For whatever reason, the local planning authority at the time didn't get to hear about it. If an applicant can demonstrate for a continuous period of 10 years that they've been using that piece of land as they're part of their curtilage, they can apply for a lawful development certificate. And if there is no compelling evidence to the contrary, the council has to issue that decision. It's become lawful. Now, again, what I think has probably happened here, going back, and again, the agent's statement, we had a 2-minute look at, so I can't, but it's a slight disadvantage, but we are where we are with that. What I imagine has happened is that the Greenbelt boundary was probably defined at least in 1997, because that was when the local plan was adopted for the council, by the council. And then it was just basically repeated with some fairly small alterations to the Greenbelt boundary when the core strategy was adopted in 2011 and when it was updated in 2015. So I would imagine that garden, inverted commas, has always been in the Greenbelt. But what's happened in 2006 is that the council's had to issue a lawful development certificate to say that part of the garden forms part of the residential curtilage. It doesn't change its Greenbelt status. Because you change Greenbelt status and you move boundaries through a new local plan. And the MPPF is absolutely explicit about that. You don't do that through individual applications, you do it through your local plan. So it is a bit of an anomaly in that part of the garden is in the Greenbelt, but it's somebody's garden. But that's because it's always been in the Greenbelt, or at least since 97, I would guess. But there's been a lawful development certificate to say that it's lawful, that it's part of their garden. So it's add that as a layer of complication. Fundamentally, it's still in the Greenbelt. Fundamentally, Greenbelt policy applies.
Councillor Arnold.
Yeah, I won't go into that too much. Obviously, we can fully understand what you're meaning now. I've got to say, I'm slightly disappointed this hasn't come up properly in the report. I've just listened to that in this speaker's statement. I picked up on that, and again, I wasn't even sure that I was listening to that correctly, so I did actually look back for myself at page 71 and read that, and that's why I put my hand up. We are where we are, but I am disappointed that wasn't raised properly.
Yeah, if it helps on the part, I've just been shown an aerial photograph from 1999 when the curtilage hadn't been extended at that point, but obviously it was probably extended shortly after. In 1999, the garden was in its sort of former position, if you like. But, you know, we are where we are with that. That is, yes, it is a slight anomaly, but we're dealing with the development plan situation as it is now. And, you know, if the applicant, the agent, whoever would have gone onto the council's website and looked at a local plan annotation, they would have clearly seen that the site is split between part Greenbelt and part not Greenbelt, and part conservation area and part not conservation area. But where, for the parts of the site where those policy designations apply, we have to apply the policy. So it's unsatisfactory, but we're applying policy. So that's why you've got that recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, obviously it's an incredibly complex case, this one, and I can see certainly looking at that statement there, it did come to us quite late. So, you know, we have, yeah, you've got to have that level of fairness, but I understand where both sides are coming from on that. Councillor Carter.
Thank you, Chair. I've got more questions raised up from what Councillor Arnold was saying, actually, and that is that if we look at the relevant planning history, the side extension that went onto the Greenbelt existed before the extension you say. So at some point, some of that garden was previously attached to that property before this, I think you called it curtilage, was extended. So my question would be, why is that part still considered Greenbelt, the side extension, as that was built before the use of the land edge read on Plan 656-102 as residential garden to the property known as the Hollies for more than 10 years. So my question is, wasn't that brought up at the time as well, if that wasn't the garden?
Chair, I think the council is referring to the 2011 extension. 11/00457 on that table. So that was after the lawful development certificate. There was an application for basically a replacement single-storey extension.
Okay, but it was the demolition of an existing one. So was that on the same?
Yeah, Chair, I don't want to get too hung up on. I mean, yes, it's a long, considering it's, you know, a single dwelling house. There's quite a lot of planning history for this particular site. We're dealing with what's in front of us now, which is not extensions, and the MPPF, the current version of the MPPF, says you can extend a dwelling within reasonable limits. And again, it's about proportional and all the rest of it. We're not talking about that. We're talking about demolition and rebuild. And the MPPF is quite clear that's only acceptable where it's not disproportionate. And now you've got the evidence from the table in the report about footprint and volume and floor space, and it's clearly significantly larger. So that's what's in front of you. We can discuss the finesses about what's happened, you know, 10 years ago or whatever, but we're determining what's in front of you now, and it's a replacement, and it's significantly larger. So if we apply that policy test in the MPPF, it falls at that hurdle.
Okay then, thank you. All right, thank you everyone there for your contributions. All right then, so if there's no further questions, what we'll do, we'll head into the debate phase now, and obviously we'll debate and come to some form of conclusion, whether that's a site visit or we head to the vote. Who would like to start? Councillor Piccolo, then Councillor Watson, and then Chinnick. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll tell you where I'm starting from. I think what we need to do is I feel we need to see the site and see the impact it will have supposedly on the Greenbelt. Now, I understand the technicalities of building on the Greenbelt and harms to the Greenbelt, but in principle, or the principle, shall we say, but the practicality is that this site is hardly overlooked by the Greenbelt. There's no benefit to the Greenbelt. It's a private back garden at the moment, which, if the trees are grown up during the summer, probably hardly anybody can see the piece of Greenbelt. It won't lead to sprawl because there's nowhere to go from the back of the garden, so it's not as though granting permission on this piece of Greenbelt, someone will then put in an application to build behind this is this in-house is just not possible, it's just not feasible. So I can't see how this will add sprawl to the greenbelt. So I think, in my view, a site visit would be helpful so that I can confirm and be satisfied within myself that in all practical senses, there's not going to be any harm because of the visual impact. Technically maybe, but visually is what it's down for. The rules were put in place because they didn't want urban sprawl and they didn't want the greenbelt to become an eyesore with buildings popping up all over the place. A great principle, but that shouldn't prevent someone developing and improving the house within the greenbelt that doesn't have that impact on the greenbelt. So that's all I have to say at the moment.
Okay, Councillor Watson.
Thanks, Chair. This is a bit of an anomaly one, to say the least, because there was permission given to actually build the original house, when maybe it shouldn't have been in the conservation area, but we are where we are. I'm pretty much in the same line as Councillor Piccolo right now. The fact of the matter is, I'm very much for the protection of the green belt, but in this instance it is their garden, and I can't see where it's being overlooked or becoming a bit of an eyesore for anybody else, really, apart from the people that's going to be living there. So I think I'm alongside Councillor Piccolo and okay with it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Shinnick, thank you.
Yeah, for me, I've got no problem with this going through because there's already an existing building there and it's partially visible to the general public, and the times of years they're going to use that path, I would think they'd see the building anyway, you know, so for me, I've got no problem with it.
Okay, thank you. Any other hands before I think there was obviously a site visit proposed there. So we'll look for a second. No other hands are raised at this stage. Councillor Carter?
Sorry, you were looking for a seconder and then I realised that wasn't what you were saying, so my hand went back down, not because you saw me.
Okay. Yeah, obviously there's a recommendation and a desire there from some members to do a site visit. I must admit, I do think that it would probably be worthwhile to take a look. We do have to be careful. I know, I mean, it does look nice, but obviously there are two clear, concise reasons for refusal there, so we need to have a little think, you know, on that site visit, do we like it? Is it going to have an impact? And if we do, if we are minded to support it, maybe at a later date, we've got to come up with some good, clear, concise reasons as to why this is acceptable. So, Councillor Piccolo, you've obviously proposed a site visit there. Is that seconded? Councillor Carter. Okay, I'll just check with Lee quickly. Okay, I'm happy to move to the vote there for a site visit. All those in favour of a site visit? Okay, and that's unanimous across the committee. Just checking, it's not usual, but we do have a meeting in early December, which doesn't really leave us a lot of time. Normally we have about 4 weeks. Is that going to be enough time, Kenna, do you think, to get a site visit before December, or should we just look out for an email tomorrow to see what options are available? I'm just trying to think of the date that the report needs to be presented back. Obviously it needs to go public. What's your thoughts there, Kenna?
Thank you, Chair. I think with looking at deadlines and obviously how close the committee is, it could be tight to get it in for December. The agenda for the December meeting is due to be published in the next few days, so it could be quite tight to get it on for that one. So, but I'm happy to look at dates to try and get this whole site visit as soon as possible. Okay,
and just sort of, I'm thinking that aloud now, obviously, we don't want to, obviously, if we miss December, then it goes into the new year, which is, it was quite some time away. I'm not against the idea of an extraordinary meeting in December. I'm not sure what other members think, but that's one idea that's floating around my head, because I don't want to, you know, this is mid-November. I don't really want to be coming back early January. Obviously, that's quite some time away, but that might be our only option. Lee, have you got any thoughts on that? It would just be a case of seeing if we can get it in within the next few days. What is the date for deadline for December? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. As Kenneth said, the December agenda is due to be published in the next couple of days, but if there is a date available, members are able to attend that site visit then we can essentially lift the report and put it into the other agenda. So there's no change, there's no updates to the report as such. It's just factoring in that site visit before the next meeting.
Okay, well that sounds more workable. I think if we could get that site visit in, and obviously we'll try and do our best. I know it's quite difficult with everyone's schedules, working schedules and everything, but if we could just have a couple of dates, let's see if we can fit that in, and hopefully we can get this back early December, and obviously if everyone can make the best efforts to be there, that'd be most welcome. Okay, are you happy with that for us to move on? Brilliant. All right then, I think that's the right thing. I would like to see this site in person. Thank you for your contributions there, and look out for an email for a site visit, and hopefully we can get this back early December. All right, thank you everyone. So that's that item addressed. That's the Hollies Rectory Road. Agenda item 8 has been deferred for a site visit. Thank you everyone. Which then takes us on to the one remaining item on the agenda here this evening. This is, of course, agenda item 7, land adjacent to the rear of the George and the Dragon, East Tilbury, found on pages 17 to 68. And Matt, I understand that you will be presenting this report also. So when you're ready, take your time, and let's hear your report. Thank you.
Right, bear with me, I need to reverse up. Right, before we get into the presentation, I need to find my notes. There we go. I've got some updates. So, for the record, we do need to run through these. Since the publication of the agenda, we've had 4 additional objections. 2 of them are from local addresses. 2 of them I can't confirm or deny because there's no postal address, they're just from email addresses. They all object, and they mention impact on highways, congestion, pressure on local infrastructure, and issues about surface water drainage. Again, since the agenda was published, we've received a stage 1 road safety audit from the applicant. If you wanted to find out all about the details about that, you'd need to ask my colleague on my left-hand side, because he does that sort of thing. I've received from the agent, I think I can describe it as an updated list of heads of terms for any potential 106 agreements. So what you'll find in the report at paragraph 6.102, which is on page 64 of the agenda, you'll see a bullet point list of what would be potential planning obligations, or heads of terms as we call them, for any potential section 106. What the applicant has done is basically sort of sending me a slightly expanded list. Now, if there are questions about whether or not this list of items would meet the planning test, well, I'm happy to discuss that further down the line, but I'm just giving you the update as it is. So the applicant has said there will be affordable housing. 100% of the development will be affordable. 25% of the units, that's 58 homes, would be what's described as zero bill. So I'll explain that when we get further down the line, and that is of importance in terms of the Greenbelt consideration, which we'll get onto. They've confirmed education contribution, which I think you probably know about. They've confirmed what's called a community and public realm contribution towards community facilities and or public realm in the local area. Not expanded upon, that's just me reading it out. East Tilbury station upgrades, which I think are all on the list. Sustainable travel enhancements, and that would be through a Section 278 agreement, so that's Highways Act sort of stuff. They would safeguard land within the application site for a potential future pedestrian footbridge over the railway line. There'd be a contribution towards healthcare. That's obviously to mitigate the impact of the development. There'd be a highways contribution, again, to be spent on highway works, figure to be agreed. There'd be money towards what's called a Linford Woods connection, and when you get to the presentation, I can tell you where that is. There'd be a contribution to RAMS, so that's the recreational mitigation strategy. That's to do with the special protection area out to the east there, and mitigating impacts. The applicant says there'll be a contribution towards a trim trail, and that would be for a piece of equipment. So there'd be a sort of like a walking, jogging trail around the site, and there'd be pieces of associated equipment. They've mentioned a defibrillator because I think discussions with the local forum have requested that provision, so they'd say they'd provide that. Again, caveat that whether or not all of these contributions, or indeed any of them, meet the tests is another matter. And then there's the usual stuff about a monitoring fee, covering the council's legal fees and indexation. So that's just to give you the full list as opposed to what's in the report. Yeah, I think that might be it for updates. Yeah, the key one, again, since the agenda was published, what the applicant has said is that 25% of the units, that's 58 units, would be what's described as zero bill. Now, although not the applicant, Ilka Homes, let's say, have an interest in the site, in the fact that it's their plans and elevations, although they're not named applicants. And members might be aware that the development in Stanford Hope, which is being constructed, a certain number of the units are have certain low carbon credentials, i.e. they're not connected to the gas network. They have PVs on the roof, so solar panels on the roof. They have air source heat pumps and they have battery storage. And the applicant considers that potentially those particular units would have either zero or very, very low energy bills because they'd be, in essence, self-supporting, self-sufficient. So what the applicant is saying is now, as opposed to what's in the committee report, 25% of the units would be to that model. So within the report, and the Greenbelt summary table, and it is just a summary table, it doesn't give you the full flavour, it just provides a snapshot. That's paragraph 646. When we drafted the report, we gave low carbon development limited positive weight. With that update, we think that should be moderate positive weight. Basically, they've gone from being building regulations compliant to something extra, extra environmental sustainability credentials. So accordingly, that more weight should be put on that particular factor. Okay, that's all the updates. We'll jump into the presentation. Okay, so that's the site. So to orientate you, the sort of settlement of Linford is off there, really to the left-hand side, to the west. East Tilbury further to the south. You can make out the railway line, which is basically running north-south through the site. The station is literally, if I get my cursor on the right, cursor's jumping about all over the place. The station is just to the south of the red line. That's the best way to describe it. And that's a Google Earth image, so it's that green area off there, bordered by Princess Margaret Road, and I think it's East Tilbury Road there, and the railway line, and then the area of to the north there where you can make out Linford Wood. That's roughly on the other side of the northern boundary of the site. It's in the Greenbelt. It's predominantly open. There are a couple of former agricultural buildings which are quite unused and fairly derelict, but apart from that, the site is open. And in terms of policy designations, sorry, I'm pressing a button, I'm pressing the wrong button. Policy designations, no surprise that the core strategy policy maps describes it as in the Greenbelt. The notation there with the blue duck, I think it is Linford Woods, which is a local nature reserve. So that's not a statutory designated ecological site, it's of local interest. And then on the other side to the west there, you've got the area of public open space, which is the playing field just to the north of the roundabout there. There are some constraints on the site. So the image on the left there, you won't be able to make out the detail, but basically the levels fall very gently to the north. And along the northern boundary, you've actually got a main river, and part of the site, again on the northern edge there, is in the medium and high risk flood zones. The majority of the site is not in that flood zone. You've also got easements for high pressure gas, so that's underground gas pipelines, which is that blue hatch line, which is sort of does a dog leg there. There's some existing trees and hedgerows on the site. And you've got the railway corridor, which imposes a constraint in terms of noise, for example. And moving on, that's the proposed site layout. So the proposal is for residential development. It's a full application, it's not outlined, so all details are for consideration now. And it's for 230 dwellings, and that's a mix of 19 flats and 211 houses, ranging between 2 and 4 bedroom. As I said earlier, all of the units are proposed as affordable housing. The further detail about storey heights, car parking, etc., is the table at paragraph 1.2 of the report. So, running through the rest of the presentation, you've got some images there showing the type of accommodation. I'm hoping my cursor is going to behave, but it really is not. There we go. So there are 2 flat blocks. So where my cursor is there, that's one flat block, and just to the south there, that's the second flat block. Apart from that, it's all houses, either semis or short terraces. It's a mix of 2 and 3 storey, which is the image on the right-hand side of the screen. There are character areas within the development, and you'll pick these out on some of the street scene elevations, but they've defined 5 character areas which you can make out there. And the image on the right, again, is quite a lot being shown there, but it's showing how the development solves the issue about car parking. So there are allocated spaces either in curtilage or outside of dwellings. There's spaces for visitors, and there's spaces for disabled users as well, all allocated on that image there. There are a variety of roof pitches. You've got a mix of flat roof, which is the 2 flat blocks, they were flat roofs, and then you've got a mix of pitch, and there are some dwellings which are actually quite a low pitch, which is that the light blue units there on the left-hand image. The right-hand image, I don't expect to pick up all the details, but it's fairly traditional finishing materials, tiled roofs, apart from the flat blocks, facing brickwork, facing render. Okay, I'm going to run through some of the main house type, and there are variations. So, for instance, for that 2-bedroom house, there are 2 types of 2-bedroom house, and you'd have a variety of coloured roof tiles, or brick, or render. So the bottom part of the image here shows the variations you could get. And there's a second 2-bedroom house, which is that style there, again fairly vernacular, fairly traditional, again a mix of brickwork and render and tiled roofs. That's the lower pitch 3-bedroom house. It's quite a shallow 11-degree pitch, and then you've also got a more traditional steeper pitch for a 3-bedroom house, and there are also some 4-bedroom houses, which are those 3-storey sort of townhouse images you've got there. Again, render, brick, tile roofs. And in terms of the proposed flats, sorry, caught up with me. That's the flat block, so they would contain 1- and 2-bedroom units, facing brickwork, a bit of render, flat roof design. I haven't shown you all the street scenes, this is just to give you a flavour. So again, related back to the character areas, the applicant has thought about different character areas within the site. You know, the entrance gateway, a central corridor, how it relates to the railway corridor, etc., etc. So there's some indicative sort of extracts from street scenes showing the arrangement of houses and flats and 2- and 3-storey and finishing materials. And that's a CGI, so always take CGIs with a pinch of salt, but that's where the, towards where the entrance would be. The proposal does include a lay-by on Princess Margaret Road, which you can just about make out there. And I think we've got a couple more CGIs. Yeah, that's sort of in the heart of the site, just showing the finishing materials and the style of houses. And then one more, and that's looking towards the low-lying part of the site, which would be kept open and would provide, you know, recreational opportunities and also flood storage and all the rest of it, or surface water attenuation. And a couple of, these are actual photographs rather than CGI, so that's looking north along Princess Margaret Road towards the main access, which would be on the right-hand side where the hedge line is. And there's also a proposed secondary access, that would be pedestrians, cycles and emergency, which is to the north of the mini roundabout, again on the right-hand side. And I think I've got some aerials, yeah, again, just showing the site in the wider context. You can make out the top image, you can make out the railway line, which forms one of the boundaries, Linford Woods, quite clearly, and then the settlement of Linford and East Tilbury further in the distance. And then similarly on that bottom image, and a couple of photographs, so that's within the site, which is open, looking towards the railway line. And that looks like a freight train from DP World on its way out or its way in. And then a second image, that's towards the low-lying part of the site. So that's probably towards the northern boundary with the tree line. Okay, if I just get the site layout and then I'll walk you through what the various planning issues which are raised. Bear with me. Okay, principal issue, unsurprisingly, the site's in the Greenbelt. So the usual tests apply. Is it appropriate development? It's not. It's building new houses in the Greenbelt, by definition inappropriate, by definition harmful. You need to consider impacts on openness, and that's both spatially and visually. It's a largely open site, apart from a very small part of the site where there's a couple of derelict agricultural buildings. It's open. Clearly there would be harm to openness, both in terms of the spatial aspect and visual aspect. And we've concluded that there would be some harm to the 5 purposes of the Greenbelt to varying degrees. Again, all set out within the report. Substantial weight should be afforded to that harm. That's what national policy says. That's what your own policies and the core strategy say. So that's your starting point on the balance which you'll need to get to. Inappropriate development should not be approved except in very special circumstances. So that's again the policy test which is set out in the MPPF. And those very special circumstances won't exist unless the harm is clearly outweighed, and I'm going to emphasise the word clearly again, by other considerations. So what you've got in the report is an analysis of the factors, the benefits which the applicant has brought forward, which they consider clearly outweigh the harm. And the judgment, as ever, is that weighing exercise to decide whether or not harm on one side of the scales is clearly outweighed, such that very special circumstances exist. So putting it in summary, and it is set out in great detail in the report from paragraph 6.25 onwards, the proposal is for 100% affordable housing. That should be given significant positive weight. The policy you have in your core strategy says 35%. This is 100%. You should be giving significant positive weight to that factor. There are some proposed transport upgrades because of the link to the station. The station is less than 100 metres away from the closest part of the site. We consider you should be giving positive weight, but it should be more limited. In terms of the contribution of the site towards the 5-year housing land supply, you'll be aware the council can't demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, and in point of fact we should have a 20% buffer as well, so technically it should be 6-year housing land supply. That should be afforded significant positive weight because this would make a contribution towards housing land supply. The applicant considers that the proposal has low carbon credentials, and I've explained that since the report was published, there's been an amendment, and now we have zero bill quote units. Approximately, not approximately, 25% of the units would be zero bill, so that should be afforded at least moderate positive weight. Similarly, connectivity enhancements, we've said that's moderate positive weight. Ecological enhancements, largely they're mitigating impact, so that's less positive weight, but still limited positive weight. And in terms of the applicant's argument about Thurrock Freeport, Thames Freeport, really no weight because that applies anywhere, and for very special circumstances to exist, there really should be site-specific factors. So the site-specific factors here, which operate on this site and perhaps less so on other sites, are the links to the station, and this is 100% affordable. We don't get many schemes which are 100% affordable. So that's where you've got more weight. The scheme does have merits, but the judgment before you is whether or not those benefits, particularly for 5-year housing land supply, 100% affordable, the connectivity improvements, whether or not they aggregate to clearly outweigh the harm. Now, it is, as ever, a judgment. The judgment we've reached, weighing everything and looking at previous appeal decisions in the borough, etc., is we don't think it's clear enough such that very special circumstances exist, albeit this site is perhaps different to some of the sites which have been brought before committee before, where, for example, it's just been policy compliant for affordable housing, and there's been no site-specific elements such as links to improvements to a station nearby. So this is perhaps more marginal than some of the Greenbelt sites which have been brought before you. But as a matter of judgment and on balance, we don't think harm, which is substantial, is clearly outweighed. That is a judgment for members, though. Briefly on other issues, this would be a modular build. And members might have seen the other site which has been built in the borough, each on its merits, of course. That modular build has some advantages. You can build more quickly. Less waste, they probably have a lower carbon footprint, so there's an advantage there. However, flip side of the coin, the comments we've received from the Council's urban designer relate to standard product, if you like. So the ability of a modular product to reflect local context, for example, is more limited. The conclusion from the Council's urban design officer is that in those circumstances, despite some of the advantages, it's not delivering high quality design. And again, going back to the MPPF, that's a policy test. It's all about high quality design. So again, a judgment, but on balance, we don't consider it delivers that high quality design. Therefore, that's potential objection to the scheme. Briefly on other issues, traffic and highways, there is a transport assessment submitted with the application. That's been largely agreed. My colleague might trip me up on that. There would be some impact, clearly. Development of 230 houses is going to have some impact, but we've concluded that with mitigation, that impact wouldn't be severe, and that is the policy test. That is the national policy test, which we have to apply. On the matter of car parking, obviously we have fairly up-to-date standards now. We've applied those standards and it meets the updated car parking standards from earlier this year. I think they were, weren't they? Flood risk, there isn't any development on the areas of the site which are at medium and high risk. We've applied the sequential and exceptions tests as required by policy, and those are met. There would be, if planning permission was to be granted, conditions to address surface water drainage, but with that in mind, there is no objection in terms of flood risk. In this case, ecology, because of the site's proximity to the SPA, so that's the special protection area off there to the east, we've had to apply the habitats regulation, and an assessment is required. That is in the report. That is met, if you like. In terms of on-site ecology, it's of limited value. There's some value from the hedgerows, but with mitigation and enhancement, there's no objection. And this site potentially offers some opportunities for enhancement and net gain. The site is next to the railway line, so potentially you've got noise as a factor, but again, with conditions, that could be mitigated. And in terms of amenity, i.e. existing residents off onto the western boundary of the site, there's no particular demonstrable harm to adjoining occupiers. And in terms of internal layouts, the garden sizes, etc., are all pretty much acceptable. Energy sustainability, I've given you the update about 25% of the units being zero bill. Section 106, a draft has been circulated. Obviously that document is without prejudice because the recommendation before you was to refuse planning permission, but we have been liaising with the applicant about a draft 106, and that includes heads of terms about affordable housing and the RAMS contributions, financial contributions, Linford Woods connection, safeguarding of land for the railway bridge and the trim trail equipment. So it sort of picks up on most of the items, but not necessarily all of the items on the applicant's list, which, being brutally honest, a couple of those items are probably just shopping list items. In conclusion then, sites in the Greenbelt, there's harm. You need to give that substantial weight. There are benefits, 5-year housing and supply and quick delivery. The applicant has said they'd be prepared to accept a shorter time period for implementation, and the experience, the anecdotal experience, I suppose, from the other site in Stamford is a quick build. That has benefit. 100% affordable has benefit. The links to the station, the connectivity improvements all have benefits. So you need to weigh that. We've concluded, because we have to jump one way or the other, that's the way it görs, that the substantial harm isn't clearly outweighed. But it's a matter of judgment for you as members. I've mentioned design, and again, it would be a matter of judgment to a degree, because there are benefits about building quickly and benefits about some of the units being low carbon. However, there are some disadvantages about standard house types and perhaps not following local context as much as they like, so that's a reservation about design. There are no other concerns that we've raised, but on those two key points, and especially on the Greenbelt point, we've on balance reached a conclusion that planning permission should be refused. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt, for that detailed report. Obviously, I've got a lot of questions. I'm sure you other members have as well. Sort of in your summing up there, I got the opinion when you sort of said you needed to jump one way or the other. It sounds to me that that's a close call here in terms of your rejection. I'm looking at the benefits such as the 5-year housing supply, 100% affordable housing, low carbon development. I think that's gone up to moderate. I think some would argue that's high, maybe significant, certainly given the climate we're in. In terms of the development itself, am I correct in thinking there's a large portion of government funding being pumped into schemes like this? I might have, I think the email I read was maybe Places for Home, which was they were given about 100 million from government to invest in schemes like this. Are you aware of that scheme? And is that attached to the more sort of affordable renting side of the scheme? Thank you.
Yeah, I think you've raised probably two points there. we've probably over the past 3 or 4 years, we've presented, I don't know, maybe half a dozen fairly large-scale residential developments in the Greenbelt to you. And I'm thinking of stuff like Woodview, Little Thurrock Marshes, the two that spring to mind for me personally, but there's probably other ones. And notwithstanding the eventual decisions and what the recommendations were, in my mind, they were a lot more clear-cut about the benefit and outweighing harm. For instance, they were just proposing policy-compliant affordable housing, which is fine, and we should give that, in light of previous appeal decisions, we should be giving that significant weight because we've got a historic undersupply. So you should be given that significant weight. And arguably, because this is 100% affordable housing, and it's about semantics to a degree, because we give you words, we say substantial, and we say significant, and we say moderate, and to a degree it's about semantics, but that's based on appeal decisions we've seen in Thurrock. That's why we use those words. But just without confusing the point, just on that particular issue, where affordable housing has been proposed previously and it's 35%, which is policy compliant, we've said significant. Arguably, 100% you should be going a bit beyond significant. Whether or not that's very significant or whatever term you want to use. So that's a difference with this particular site. And the low carbon thing, yes, it's clearly a benefit which is above and beyond the usual building regulations requirement. So we've said moderate, but how you weigh it is for the decision maker, which is, I'm looking across at the decision makers, you're the decision maker, it's for you to weigh that. And this is, in my mind, compared to some of the cases which you've been presented with over the past 3 or 4 years, this is a lot more marginal. We do have to jump one way. I've worked at previous authorities where the chair has said, can you give either or recommendations? And the answer's always been, no, I'm afraid we can't. We do have to jump one way, and planning's a grey area. It's never straightforward, and there's always benefit and there's always harm. We do have to give you a black and white recommendation on our best experience and best technical knowledge and all the rest of it. But there's some grey areas in this one. This is a more marginal one than a number of other ones you've dealt with in the past 3 or 4 years. So that's that point. The second point, you did give me a heads up about some of the questions this morning, so thanks for that. So it didn't come as a complete surprise. On the government funding question, which I've got paperwork everywhere, bear with me. I did get an email from the house builder, which I'm just going to paraphrase. So the question was sort of, what government funding may be available to develop this scheme? And the sort of answer is, well, the affordable housing element obviously would be taken up by a registered provider. It wouldn't be Ilk Homes, it would be taken over by a registered housing association, a registered provider, and they could make use of grant funding. So there's a process where Homes England have grant funding, but it would be for the registered provider to explore that route and to go through it. I mean, there were some questions you asked me about nomination rights, etc., etc. I mean, that's all valid. That's all good questions. But and there is an answer to that in terms of drafting the 106 and all the rest of it. So, for example, with the affordable rent, yes, there could be a nominations agreement. So it's local priority first. But happy to answer anything else as best I can.
Yeah, so just picking up on that, in terms of the affordable aspect of it, and that's obviously the zero bill home aspect, I understand. So the 58 units will be for there's the 25%, and that's for the affordable rents. So we could potentially look to prioritise those for Thurrock residents, yet this potentially, but the 75%, that's obviously ownership, and ownership's open to everyone who registers interest. So there's 25% of it. We could potentially make sure it's earmarked for Thurrock residents, whereas the 75, that's going to be obviously open market. But then just following up on that, and I'll hand over to other members. What was the sort of take up for the Stamford scheme? Do we know? Is that local Is there a lot of local uptake, or you're probably not aware? Thank you.
I can't answer that second question, but I can confirm on the first point you made. So the 58 units, 25%, which would be affordable rent, yes, there would be nomination rights, which the council could exercise. For the remainder of the 75%, which would be intermediate shared ownership, you couldn't have that level of control.
Okay, thank you. Well, I've got a few more questions, but what I'd like to open it up now to other members. I think Councillor Arnold had your hand up first, then I'll go to Councillor Piccolo.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I have got 2 pages of questions, but I'm just going to knock a couple of quick ones off and then I'll hand over to other members. We've touched on the Stamford site. That's come up already. That land, I believe, also was Greenbelt land. Can I ask what the difference between that Greenbelt land and this Greenbelt land is, and why that was actually then developed? What are the reasoning for that?
The Stamford site was in the Greenbelt. If you look at the 1997 adopted local plan, it was designated as Greenbelt. Probably in about 2008, 2009, the former Development Corporation made a series of non-statutory sort of area master plans where they allocated that site for residential, and there was an application which was submitted, an outline application which was approved. It was referred to the Secretary of State, etc., etc., wasn't called in, so there was an approval. And then what happened in 2011, when the core strategy was adopted, that site was taken out of the Greenbelt. So it's gone. So it was, but it's no longer.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, just another sort of an odd question that came into my mind today. You know, it's got an 18-month build target. Could there be, if this was recommended for approval, could there be a condition put on that where it had to be done within 18 months?
I think the simple answer is yeah. I'm trying to find that part of the report, so you might have to bear with me. But ordinarily, if full planning permission is granted, there's a standard condition which says development has to be commenced within 3 years. And in fact, that condition applies by statute in point of fact. So even if the local planning authority doesn't put it on, it defaults that it's put on, if you sort of see what I mean. There is latitude for a local planning authority to choose a different time period, and it works the other way as well. For example, on big schemes which can be delivered over many years, you can put a later start period on, but equally I think it's fairly legitimate to put on a shorter time period. So simple answer, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, just coming back to the design aspect, it's not really so much a... Oh, very sorry. Yeah, just coming back to the design aspect, you know, what you was touching on there. It's maybe not so much a question, maybe I could leave it till next time, but I think the development that's further down over the line and back near the Barter development, it's in Shearwater Drive, I think it is, forgive me if that's the right road. I mean, they are all really of a very, very similar design, aren't they? So I don't see how that argument comes into this, because I think there's quite a number of houses down there, aren't there? So I would say that part of this reasoning doesn't really have much weight.
So I was distracted, my screen just went completely. Anyway, Barter Fields development is what you're referring to, which is 299 units, I think, which were, yeah. There's a bit of a backstory with that one. So that was, the chronology for that is there was an application made, I think about 2009, to the former Development Corporation. There was an appeal against non-determination because it wasn't determined in the statutory time period. It got called into a public inquiry. So it was an outline application for, yeah, say circa 300 units. I think it was a bit more actually. It went to a public inquiry. The inspector and the Secretary of State ultimately were convinced that, one, there was a need for housing development because it was a greenbelt site. But the other issue there was it bordered the conservation area, and that was a particular issue. But the inspector was satisfied that for an outline application with all matters reserved, including appearance and layout and landscaping, that subject to an updated design code, he was satisfied that it wouldn't be harmful to the character and appearance of the conservation area. My personal opinion, poor decision. But we are where we are. And what you see, because I then picked up the reserve matters, so this is personal experiences, then we were sort of, the cards had been dealt, and we had to do the best we could. And bearing in mind it was a volume house builder, so we're almost trying to make the best of the cards we had dealt with there, and I think we probably did as best we can. Am I being critical of the scheme? Yeah, I'm being critical of the scheme. I'm just going to be honest with you. For this site, and it's each on merits, of course, so the context is a little bit different. Yeah, it's next to a railway line, fairly close to a station, but that was cheeked by jail with a conservation area. And at least a number of the units had the flat roof design, which is characteristic of the Barter estate. If you look at the factory estate, that's a key defining characteristic. This is one step removed from the conservation area. You've got a ribbon of development on the western side of Princess Margaret Road, which is, you know, mixed sort of vernacular. That's a judgment. Yeah, that's easy for me to say because I'm sitting on this side of the chamber. It's a judgment. The context is different from Barter Fields. The concern, I suppose, is since that decision was made on Barter Fields and now design, and you can design, you know, you can define design in a number of ways. It's not just how buildings look, it's the spaces in between, it's the layout, it's the landscaping, it's not just what brick it is, it's far more holistic than that. The context has changed in that national policy now puts design up here. You know, it's really important. It should be one of the main considerations. You know, it's indivisible from good design. I'm just chucking quotes at you. You know, good design is indivisible from good planning. And the latest iteration of the NPPF, which is only fairly recent, introduced the word beauty. Development should be beautiful. I mean, how you define that, of course, I don't know. But there's a higher bar for design. So I think the concern with this one is it's modular, which has some benefits. However, there are some drawbacks with that, in that you're probably limited to a degree about external finishes and external appearance. And if we're being critical, visually how these dwellings would look on this site would be potentially not a lot of difference from the Stanford Hope site. So is that reflecting local context? Now I know that's, some of those arguments are a bit nebulous and are a bit esoteric and it's judgment and all the rest of it, but that's probably the main issue here. And you do have to judge, despite what's happened down at Barter Fields and despite what's happened at the Stanford Hope site, you do have to judge it on the characteristics of the site and the local context. So that's, again, another difficult call for you, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll leave that there for a minute and I'll come back a little bit later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I had Councillor Piccolo, then Councillor Tandy.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of, something to be clarified. I think you broached on it just at the end of that statement there. But high quality design, the visual aspect of high quality design is not the only factor in what you need to consider for high quality design. Am I correct in saying that there's lots of other things to take into consideration, like energy efficiency, the size of the rooms and all that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, funnily enough, quite a few officers this morning had a Teams call about a new piece of work, which is going to be the review of the Thurrock design strategy. So we have a design strategy, which we probably don't refer to often enough, unfortunately, but we're looking to refresh it. So we had a meeting this morning to basically kick some ideas around. And on the group I was sitting in, yeah, we got into the debate about, well, what's design? And I think for too many people, and this isn't a criticism, but for too many people, it's pretty, well, what does it look like? So it's like, what bricks are they, you know, and does it look nice? You know, you're right, it's far more than that. It's not just about the appearance of the buildings and their style, it's about their bulk and their massing and their arrangement, so a layout of development, and the open space and the landscaping and the public realm. It's far more broad than I'm looking at something that looks okay, or it looks nice, or it looks beautiful, which is the policy test. It's far more involved than that. So going back to what's in front of you, you might take a different view about layout, for example. You might think, well, actually, the layout is sound. And I think we've referred to it in the report that, you know, there's retained open space. There's a corridor on the side with the railway line where there'd be, you know, a separation. So in terms of, it's responded to its context, but layout is perhaps not so much the issue. It's perhaps the limitations about standard, the visual limitations of a standardised product, even though there are benefits to standardisation.
Yeah,
which I've
I
referred
see
to. But yeah, it's a broader issue.
I was just trying to get the fact that the high quality design isn't always seen. It's the efficiency of the building and everything else to take into consideration as well. So that's what made me think that in the report it said it wasn't like a high quality design. So that you've clarified that to me. The other thing was there's two other sites actually over in the east of the borough. You've mentioned one of them. They have uniform design. I mean, I think both of the estates, I know definitely for one, but it doesn't matter what size house it is, every door is exactly the same colour, exactly the same design. You couldn't tell from looking at the front of the house whether it was private rented, owned, a council house, or whatever. And I think, sorry, I'm getting into debate now, so I'll come off of that. But I think that's the point. I think with this one is that whilst you're saying whilst the report is saying it's too uniform, I think in this day and age, the fact that you can't identify who's living, what type of person or what type of family is living in that house, I think in actual fact is very important because it leads towards social inclusion. Anyway, I'll finish there.
Can I just respond? I think you've made a really good point, and I was just thinking about it. So if you're talking about the Barter estate, the residential estate, I mean, it was developed in different phases. I mean, there's a 1950s part, and there's a core bit which is 30s, which is standard. And if you look at the layout, it's grid, and they were, putting it bluntly, they were cheap housing. Standard product. I mean, there's some of them which were, you know, if you walk around the estate, you'll probably know some of them were managers' housing, which were a bit bigger and they had a little bit more detail. But that was workers' housing, and it was standardised. It was from a different era. So I get the point you're making about the tension between, you know, standardisation, ticking the box on one particular site, and then potentially it's not potentially acceptable in this site. I do, yeah, that's a fair point.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to more questions. Just looking at the time, it's 4 minutes past 9, so I'll suspend standing orders until we've discussed the entirety of this item and come to some form of conclusion. Is that agreed? Excellent, excellent. So we'll extend past 9:30. Next was Councillor Tandy, then Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Could you elaborate a bit more on these carbon zero houses and no gas supplies? Because that sounds quite interesting. And is there any other examples in the borough we have these built?
Yeah, the details, I understand it, and this is probably from what I picked up from the Stamford-le-Hope site, from going on site in the summer, is the homes aren't connected to the gas network, so there's no gas for heating, there's no gas boilers, there's no gas for cooking, so they're off grid for gas. And bearing in mind utility prices at the moment, that's not such a bad thing, I suspect. So they would be connected to the electrical supply system, but on the roof they'd have PVs, so they work on photovoltaics, give it its proper term. So they generate electricity during hours of daylight. You don't need full sunlight, you just need daylight. And obviously different times of the year they produce in different amounts. They have battery storage, which is a key component about, solar farms, for example. You need the battery storage to hold the energy for when you need it. So PVs, battery storage, which as it was explained to me, and members might have had the benefit of site visit, that's like a couple of suitcase-sized things in the loft, and that would be full of lithium cells. So that would hold electricity. And then air source heat pumps, which take heat out of ambient air. Even on cold days, there's still heat there, and there's a compressor, and they use that for, to take the heat. So they're badged as being zero bill. I suppose the proof's in the pudding. I mean, I don't know, but in essence, they could be certainly in summer, I could see them being self-sufficient. When you've got, a lot of daylight and you're using less power anyway, you'd probably run up a utility bill in summer. Don't know about winter yet, but the applicants here, they may pick up on that point. So that's what zero bill, as described as the applicant, means. They're self-sufficient certainly self-sufficient in terms of not relying on gas, and then relying on electricity generated and storing electricity in the individual units. So potentially the applicant has said 25% of the units on this site would be that model. On the Ilka home sites at Stamford-le-Hope, it's more. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a higher percentage. The applicant may pick up on that. Did you ask another question? It's gone out of my head.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on to Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. So, just what you just said about gas, though, Matt, in new builds, there is no gas being put in. Any new build under Code 4? So,
Pass.
what I'm saying is, then saying about the gas is a good thing for a no bill, is they're not going in anyway. In a new build.
Okay.
He's going to.
Is he not in this?
The Stamford site has gas.
Never known any
Yeah,
other site.
anecdotally, I think I've seen some of the drawings I've seen for the Stamford site, where the detail about position of solar PV panels, etc. I think some are connected. So I'm not my area of expertise about that, but I suppose coming at it from another way, we have a policy requirement in the core strategy about a certain percentage of the electricity or the energy needs of major housing developments should be generated on site. It's a certain percentage. this is at the very least ticking this box and probably doing more. So that's another way to sort of look at it. But yeah, I think you're probably right. The site's still Stamford. I'm fairly certain some of them are hooked up to gas. Traditional gas boilers. I mean, long term, of course, they'll probably be phased out the way things are going, but...
So my question was around flooding, to be honest with you. So I am slightly worried about where this actually sits in terms of there's a river by the side of it, and also we already know that that part of the borough anyway is known for flooding. Also, in your report, Angler Water is also slightly worried as they want a drainage strategy, and they require an alternative drainage strategy to be agreed as well on this development. So my question is, what is the mitigation against that when you've got a river sitting on a floodplain, and Anglia Water's already asked for an alternative drainage strategy to be agreed for that area?
Right, if I go back to the constraints plan, so that image on the right-hand side, ignore the dark blue, but again, let me get the cursor in the right place. So the area through there, that northern edge, is in the medium and high flood risk. That's zones 2 and 3, and there is a main river there as well, which is the watercourse. I mean, that's an EA, Environment Agency designation. So any sort of river stroke watercourse they define as a main river. So that is a constraint. You'll see from that image that none of the dwellings have been located in the medium and high risk flood zones, which is what the MPPF and what local policy is all about. You don't locate dwellings in those areas unless they're protected, because there will be parts of the borough, especially in this neck of the woods, where there are sites in the higher flood risk zone, but they're protected by tidal defences along the water. This is a different. The water course is the source of flooding, but this is at a level, and the levels drawing, which you won't be able to make out the detail, shows levels falling towards the water course. So this is at a higher level. So we have to apply sequential and exceptions tests. They're passed. This wouldn't flood. The question about surface water drainage is a fair point. So what the applicant has suggested, and it's probably, if I jump back to the layout plan, which I've gone past, sorry, it's a long day. There we go. So on that, right at the northern edge there, there's an indication of an attenuation basin, which is a shallow basin, and at certain rainfall events, water would be stored there and then discharged into the watercourse or into the drainage network at what's called greenfield rates. It's fairly common practice. So although that's on a drawing, and although the application is probably accompanied by a flood risk assessment and drainage strategy, so there's a flood risk assessment as part of the submitted documentations, submitted documents. So although you've got that, it's fairly common practice for a consultee to say, yeah, that's fine, but it might need a refresh, and we might need to see detailed calculations, and we might need to see what the detail of the volume is, and we might need to see the profiles, etc., etc. So I'm just going to have a quick look at their response. Yeah, so there's no objection, but the discharge rate within the strategy, yes, it's an alternative strategy, so the modelling would have to be redone. That might change the calculations of what the basin could hold. It might change its shape slightly or its depth slightly. It's not a showstopper, if you wanted my honest opinion.
Sorry, Chair, can I just ask one thing about the highways? Now, you had done an audit around the highways, but the other thing as well is there is going to be 460 cars on this development if we're looking at 2 spaces each. does that have no impact at all on the surrounding areas, have you found?
So, yeah, in terms of, I think it's turned itself back on. In terms of impact, once you get, as I said, you get further afield to the critical junctions, though obviously local junctions are critical as well, the more critical junctions where you've got more traffic, that the impact is less severe at those junctions. So in terms of its traffic impact, we couldn't refuse it on that. And as I said, you won't get 406 vehicles coming out all at the same time.
What about in construction with the HGVs? How many are we predicting a day, June?
I haven't seen the SEMP yet. I don't think that's been submitted yet. But obviously we will have a look at that, and then in terms of the appropriate routing, and more than likely the routing will be out via towards Buckingham Hill Road. But obviously its impact will be for shorter periods of time. From experience from the Stanford site, obviously you get a situation with the Stanford site where obviously there was a bit of site clearance to begin with. So you obviously had a number of lorries, and then I think they have, depending on how many units they put in a day, something like 10 to 15 deliveries a day, something in that region. I mean, if you look at that compared to what Walsh's site was actually pushing through East Tilbury at the time, it will have an impact for a short period, but it won't have a significant impact over a longer period than the site. So you're not going to get hundreds of lorries a day, if you like.
Matt, affordables, the houses. So we're talking about 58 noms agreement into the council, hopefully, and then the rest is intermediate on shared ownership. You then spoke about a grant. Is there a housing association and a joint venture sitting behind this?
Thanks for that difficult question. Bear with me. I might have to check a message on the phone, so because it's been one of them sort of days.
Sorry, whilst you're looking for that, Matt, I'll come in with a highways question, and then you can, hopefully, Matt will have the answer by then. So, look, we're looking at a couple of reasons for refusal. One is Greenbelt, one's design, and obviously the developers are putting a lot of weight behind that. One of the concerns that we're hearing from the residents is this level crossing. But obviously, it's not tipping the balance of saying, look, that's going to have a massive impact on the road network. So first of all, it is near the station, so you would anticipate that people on this development will be using that station. What you've not got no concerns in terms of tailbacks, or effectively tailbacks, you know, they are what they are with level crossings, and probably quite a difficult question to answer. I know there's a couple there around highways, but I remember meeting up, it was probably about 5-6 years ago now, over a form of master plan for East Tilbury, and that master plan actually had a bridge going over the crossing, not there, but obviously that was for thousands of homes, and it was on the sort of a similar road network. So we have to, I think we accept that if we do go ahead with this, that there's going to be an additional impact on that level crossing. But are we sort of suggesting that most of the vehicles will be coming out and turning right, as opposed to going into Tilbury? And then, of course, this is on the northern side of the crossing. So, for example, if this was on the southern side, every car would use the crossing, whereas because it's on the northern side, not as many. What's your thoughts around? Because that's really what we're getting from concern around residents. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't disagree with the concern from a highways point of view. If you look at our comments in full, we did have some concerns. The audit they're talking about is they did an early safety audit, and then I actually raised the concerns similar to what residents are in terms of the impact of the gates, and obviously. I actually live near a level crossing myself, so I know how they operate. I know people sometimes will jump the queues to go down side roads, but it was audited. The auditor went out. He did observe long queues going back towards the roundabout, but he didn't see any significant interaction with the current roads that are there, so Hawk Drive, didn't see any significant issues with people trying to jump the queues, for instance, to go down Hall Drive. Unfortunately, I wasn't informed of the audit itself. Normally, we would like to attend those type of things just to see what it is. But as I said, I live near a level crossing myself, probably not a dissimilar distance from what the current mini roundabout is to the level crossing, and I live on the same line, so I know the ins and outs of how it operates. And obviously we did have some concerns, but yeah, the majority of the movements from the site are likely to be out of the village. Yes, there will be some into the village, because obviously at the moment the village school is, or the primary school is within the village, but we've looked to ask them to encourage for alternative modes of transport in terms of cycling, walking. We asked in terms of if they are reserving an area for the potential footbridge, which was part of the previous development, part of the provisions of the previous development on the south side, to provide a footbridge for pedestrians and whatever it is, because obviously the issue at the moment, when the gates close down, not only are cars obviously stuck at the gates, but obviously pedestrians are a very similar situation to where I live in Stamford. But overall, there wasn't a significant or severe reason for us to refuse it on those grounds, unfortunately. You have to look at it in terms of how it meets with policy and how it meets with the NPPF. And in those concerns, we couldn't see a severe reason for refusal, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. And then just following up on that, and Matt, you can come back on yours. I imagine you're going to need some form of mitigation around that entrance and exit, because when the level crossing is down, obviously you don't want cars to get trapped in the development. Now, most will be coming out and turning right, but yeah, you're going to maybe even some form of yellow box junction, but I assume that would be in the pipeline under Section 106. Thank you.
Yeah, as part of the 278, I think they've suggested keep clears and the right turn lane and the various measures to ensure that that the access is kept clear. We can't always guarantee that, but obviously that yes, there will be mitigation measures to try and get around that.
Okay, thank you. Matt, thanks for that. Hopefully you've had a bit of time there to research that, and if you could respond to Councillor Watson.
Yeah, Chair, I was looking for an email because I have seen an email from Guinness Trust, I think is the name of the association. It sort of expressed interest in the site, and I'd had it confirmed on a message from earlier today. So yes, now where that sits in terms of have they signed a contract, I haven't got a clue. Is that material? Possibly not. But there's a named registered provider who's expressed an interest, and that's been sent. A letter from that provider has been sent to by email to the local planning authority. The applicant, I think, is going to speak. They may want to pick up on that point if they so wish.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Piccolo, Councillor Arnold. I'll ask a couple more, and then we'll get the statements in, and then we can ask some more questions after that. So, Councillor Piccolo.
Yeah, just some clarification about the lorry movements on the site. I mean, I live probably 50 yards from the entrance to the site in Stamford Oak that's been referred to. It's on the main roundabout that goes up to the Manaway, which is one of the main exits, if not the main exit out of Stamford Hope. And they've controlled the entrance of lorries extremely well. Two turn up together. They have marshals there ready to close the road, and I would have said that probably it takes about 2 or 3 minutes at the most for them to get the two lorries onto the site. So that's my personal observations. I say I live 50 yards away. I'm at home a lot of the time during the day, and it doesn't cause any major problems. I'd know because there'd be cars tooting their horns are all over the place or whatever it is, but that's just for the other members' information.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, got an eye on the time, I know. I thought it only right, but obviously there are 287 letters of objection. That's an extremely large amount by all accounts, by normal standards, so I just thought it only right that I actually have a quick look through, pulled out a few questions and asked them maybe on the residents' behalf. They're only sort of really quite quick ones, but you might be able to address them quite easily. The first one is, resident has said the proposal would cause a loss of privacy and overlooking. I know there's an aspect of this on Princess Margaret Road, but is that a concern of yours?
Chair, I think within the report we did go into some detail to look at the relationship between, from paragraph 6.93 on page 61. So we've set out the adjoining closest neighbours. So there's numbers 1 to 3 St Clair cottages, and you've got 1 and 2 Monks cottages. And we've looked at the relationships, and you've got reference to back-to-back distances, for example. They're all satisfactory. The dwellings on the western side of Princess Margaret Road, the relationship across a road to the new dwellings would be a fairly standard sort of relationship. So there's no overriding concerns about privacy, loss of outlook, loss of sunlight or daylight, no.
Okay, thank you. Just another quick one. Inadequate parking proposed. So presumably this does meet, obviously, all the national standards, etc. I mean, we've obviously heard quite a bit about it so far, but you are, again, just addressing this gentleman's or this resident's question. Is that, that's all okay, is it? There is adequate parking.
Yeah, Julian might want to kick me under the table, but paragraph 6.74 on 6.74 on its own, on its own, refers to the updated parking standards. They were from earlier this year because the old standards were quite dated. And the definition of locations, whether or not they're high accessibility, medium or low. So it goes through that argument. The standards set out a range depending on flats or houses. And I think the conclusion at the bottom of that paragraph that, yes, we've recognised that many representations have referred to a perceived lack of car parking, but judged against the standards the council's adopted earlier this year, it would be satisfactory. So we don't think that would be a reason to withhold planning permission, no.
Okay, thank you. And then just another quick one. Someone says insufficient shops in the location to serve the additional population. I personally don't see that as a problem, because... Have you got any comment on that?
Well, I suppose conversely, if you have a bigger residential population, it could support a wider range of services. It works the other way with pressure on other types of infrastructure, but in terms of there not being enough shops, well, 230 dwellings and a fairly high proportion of family dwellings could encourage more businesses into the area, in theory.
Okay, well, when we're coming back to the summing up, I've got a little piece on that anyway. But Chair, I just wanted to bring some in. Someone wrote a question just saying, or a comment saying, future occupiers will be undesirable residents. I'd just like to point out that's quite an unhelpful comment from that resident, so I'll end it there.
Okay, thank you. I've got one quick question, and then we'll invite the speakers down, and of course we can ask some more after that. The proposed layouts that you've got on your screen there, obviously that is designed to mitigate against those semi-concerns about flooding. One of the comments from the design officer was that the site itself is low density, which I found that was a bit of a strange. I think there's a bit of a conflict there. So in one sense they're saying it's not a good use of land because there's not enough houses on it, but then at the same time, obviously you wouldn't really be able to put any more residential on there. Obviously, it would flow into the flood zone. Am I correct there? Low density. The comment, is that correct?
Chair, if you look at the site area, which is about 9.5 hectares, the number of units, the density comes out about 24. I think it is. It's at the table at the beginning of the report. Yeah, about 24.4 units per hectare. That is fairly low. I mean, there is a...
Good thing, is it not?
Sorry?
It's a potentially good thing that it's low density. You know, high density's crammed and...
It's an interesting point, and I think there are a number of different arguments which probably stem from that. Some of my planning colleagues will remember PPG3. Or they may not remember PPG3, but it was national. Before you had the MPPF, you had a number of national policy statements for different topics. One was housing, and it was probably early 2000s, I would guess. And it basically said, unless there are very good reasons, all new residential schemes should be at least 30 dwellings per hectare to try and make best use of the land. So in that context, yeah, this is low. But the site is in the green belt. The prevailing character of the area is not particularly high density. It might be a touch higher, but it's not an urban high density location. The other sort of curveball I'm going to throw in there is that there's a chapter of the MPPF which refers to basically making best use of sites. Let me find the chapter, where are we? Chapter 11, making effective use of land. So it basically sort of says where you've got sites which are available for development, you've got to try and make the best of them to be efficient and all the rest of it. So broadening that out, and bearing in mind the status of the site at the moment, broadening it out, the applicant, the landowner, has promoted this site through the call for sites for the new local plan. So in the fullness of time, a decision will be made about this site and others in the locality about whether or not they're suitable sites for release from the greenbelt. It being very, very close to a station, my opinion is if, and it's all ifs, buts and maybes, if the site in the future was released from the greenbelt, we'd be looking to up the density. But It hasn't been released to the Greenbelt because we haven't got a new local plan. It's in the Greenbelt. And the local context at the moment is probably around about 30 DPH, 30 dwellings per hectare. You know, it's family housing, it's 1 and 2 storey. If you go a bit further south, I'm trying to think, apart from the factory estate, I can't think, and the old hotel, I don't think you've got any 3-storey. So it's an interesting point the urban design officer makes, but 24 dwellings per hectare is probably about right in that context, as a matter of opinion. I mean, some members will know the site and they'll form their own opinion about that.
Okay, thank you. Right, so what we'll do, we will go to more questions, but in the meantime, we do have 2 speaker statements here this evening. The first is a statement of objection from the local ward councillor, that's Councillor Massey. And Councillor Massey, if you'd like to come down, and you've got 3 minutes in which to present your case. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, Committee. In relation to this planning application, I would like to speak as East Tilbury Ward Councillor to object. Fellow Ward Councillor, Councillor Salmons, also objects for the same reasons. Primarily, these reasons for objection are 1. Loss of greenbelt, 2. Highway safety, road access, traffic generation, 3. General site location. Firstly, I am pleased to see Thurrock planning officers have recommended this application to be refused. This recommendation is along the letters of 287 of representation, which also objected. Historically, this is a large number of objections for the ward. I agree with the conclusions and reasons for recommendation in relation to loss of greenbelt. I feel the very special circumstances to develop on the greenbelt have not been met, and the semi-rural feel of the area is due to the greenbelt in the local area. Any loss of this greenbelt would potentially urbanise an area which does not have infrastructure in place to allow for hundreds more homes. The East Tilbury Conservation Area, which is rated very bad by Historic England's Heritage Risk Register, and although this application is not within that area, it is, in terms I would describe, a stone's throw away from the boundary. The road itself in Linford, which has not been changed for decades, by adding more houses and access roads to this location, would only lead to more vehicles on the local road network, which is already having many issues due to new housing and the proximity of the railway crossing. This is made far worse by the increase of freight trains using the ports which join the tracks at Mucking, which will also increase by further industrial development at the old refinery sites, which has already had outline approval. Effectively, the gates are going to be down a lot more often in the future, and this will only increase. This creates a large amount of traffic which regularly blocks the road, with queues all the way back to the small parade of shops at Linford and beyond. Not only is this idling traffic causing a lot of noise and air pollution, but it prevents access by emergency vehicles when needed on the other side of the railway. This development would only add to the issue. If the committee were minded to overturn the refusal recommendation, I would ask them to consider a site visit on a weekday around 6 p.m. to see exactly how bad the traffic already is in the exact area where the proposed entry point for this development would be sited. That being said, the application does have some merits. The green credentials are not of any particular concern. But even taking the smaller positive aspects of the application, the overreaching reasons of the greenbelt, highway and traffic concerns, and general site location are seen as major reasons why this application should be refused. The area has already seen hundreds of new homes with very little in the way of infrastructure upgrades, and residents are still angry and frustrated that another nearby development has not been completed and is still bringing no benefit to the community. Adding further new homes on the greenbelt in this location would be a detriment to the area. The general area's infrastructure has not changed to allow these large number of new homes. We are already heavily impacted due to the railway crossing, flood areas and general road access. I would ask the committee to hear the concerns of ward councillors and the 287 letters or comments and refuse planning for this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that statement. Thank you. Okay, and that then takes us on to our last speaker statement of this evening, and that's a statement of support. That's the agent, Matthew, if you'd like to come down, and you have 3 minutes in which to present your case.
Good evening. My name is Matt Suggett and I'm the Regional Development Director at Ilkley Homes. Producing modular homes since 2016, we are the market leader in modular construction, on course to deliver 10,000 homes across the UK in the next 5 years. Our homes are manufactured in a factory before being installed on site, ensuring the highest levels of quality control and energy efficiency. Some of you have visited our scheme in Stanford-le-Hope, where we are delivering 153 affordable homes. You will have seen the high-quality design of these homes firsthand. With significant shared ownership sales uptake from local residents and key workers of Thurrock, the need and desire for our homes is very real. We are excited to bring forward another housing site in the borough. Our Linford proposals provide significant benefits. First and foremost, the provision of 230 affordable homes. These homes, supported by your housing team and our shareholder, the Guinness Partnership Housing Association, will provide options for future generations wanting to stay in the area. Thurrock's annual monitoring, published in March 22, shows that 64 affordable homes were delivered in the last reporting year. This one site, therefore, equates to 3.5 years of affordable housing supply based on historical trends. Our modular homes can be delivered twice as quickly as traditional methods, and we've agreed to a shorter 18-month implementation period to ensure expedited delivery. Ilkley is pioneering the way on reducing carbon emissions in the construction of new homes. We exceed the enhanced regulations coming in this year and on average consume 20% less energy than a traditional new build, reducing energy bills through enhanced building fabric and insulation. This has never been more important, given the energy crisis we're facing and the rising fuel poverty, particularly acute in the affordable sector. For the 58 affordable rent homes, we've committed to implementing our zero build scheme, making this the largest zero build development in the country. Free of gas, employing advanced technology such as air source heat pumps, PV and battery storage, together with our unique Octopus energy tariff, will result in the average consumer not paying any energy bills for at least 5 years. These homes are operationally zero carbon. The scheme provides for off-site benefits for Linford and East Tilbury too. This includes nearly £2 million for education, £90,000 for healthcare, £225,000 towards public realm improvements across Linford and East Tilbury, money for upgrades to East Tilbury Station, and for ecological enhancements. The site includes an outdoor gym and improved pedestrian and cycle links in response to the Your Place, Your Voice initiative. The proposals safeguard land should the local plan opt for the pedestrian bridge across the railway line. Overall, given the extensive benefits that the application will deliver, we strongly believe that the proposals meet the very special circumstances required for Greenbelt development and will provide a development that Thurrock can be proud of.
Thank you very much for that statement. Okay then, right, so that opens us up to further questions. Matt, just picking up on some of the comments there. So there was a comment there, looking at our current targets of affordability, this one site would deliver on average, well, 3.5 years on one site based on what we've done over the last few years. So I imagine over the last few years across the borough we've delivered, well, roughly 230 sites. Is that correct? It was 3.5 years, I think.
Yeah, I haven't got the precise figures in front of me, but we have to publish that data on a yearly basis. Along, you know, there's the housing delivery test and all the rest of it. I think this, if approved, would make a significant contribution over and above what's happened in previous years. That's fair to say. I can't, you know, I could take it away and bring it back. I can't give you a precise figure, but it's demonstrably delivering a lot of affordable housing on one site against a backdrop of historic under-delivery.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? No? Okay. If there's no further questions, what we'll do then, we'll head into the debate phase. So, look, ultimately with this particular application, I don't actually think there are any right or wrong decisions. I think, look, we can reject the application, which is the officer recommendation, but are we actually helping people getting on the property ladder in a housing crisis? We can approve the application, but quite clearly that's against the officer recommendation. So, look, it's a tough one. It's not easy. From my own opinion, I think that I've never on planning in all my years on planning. I've never come across a site that's 100% affordable. Obviously, this zero bill homes aspect is, I think, hopefully something we're going to have to get used to for the future. Looking at the benefits throughout the report, it matches education and health benefits. There's 225k there for the local community, and look, ultimately, it's not about us. It's about the 230 people that are going to be living in these homes. I don't need a home. I've already got one. It's hard out there. Renting is a crisis. Housing's a crisis. We've got a climate crisis. We've got an energy crisis, and we've got a developer that's come along here, I think, at the right time and seems to be delivering all the sorts of things that we do need. So, look, it's not easy. There are going to be concerns there, I think, over the road network. I don't think it's being close to the station. I think it will have a limited impact, but an impact nevertheless. So on that basis, for me, I think it's a go. I think we should be approving this sort of development, and that's the direction I'm heading in. It'll be interesting to see what everyone else thinks. There are 7, with me, there are 6 other members. It'll be interesting to see what you think. Paul, you've got your hand up first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I called Councillor Salmons this afternoon, actually quite a lengthy conversation with her, and she obviously concurs with everything that Councillor Massey has said. And I've obviously listened to Councillor Massey with equal interest. And I have read through all of the bullet points on the 287 residents, obviously, as you can gather. And I really, you know, to a degree, I can agree with many things. Some I can't. But tonight I am going to vote in favour of this application. And it is for the following reasons. I think there are enough very special circumstances to warrant building on this piece of greenbelt. And it's really all best laid out, in my opinion, on page 41. All the reasoning is there. This modern modular construction, I think it is the future. And to be fair, if it's happening in Thurrock, I think that's a marvellous thing. It's well designed. This proposal's got a good mix. It's high quality homes. They've all got charge points, and I guess that's all sort of modern compliance issues anyway. There's ample parking, and they are super efficient homes. It is surrounded by good quality amenity space. I've been down there again today. Obviously, I live fairly close to that area, and I'm through that way quite often. But I did get in my van today, have another little look around. There's lots and lots of green space there for residents to enjoy. Considering the amount of homes as well, again, this is something I've looked at as well. You know, the impact on the local village, I think, is minimal from a visual point of view. You know, obviously of the road, the pub is there. The railway line is a significant length of the development, so that's kind of obscuring that sort of aspect of the development from the village as well. I can only see this actually as being a major benefit to the retail outlets in the area. I mean, it's the footfall that this will generate to the local businesses around there, I think, is going to be considerable, and I would imagine there have been no letters of objection from local traders. They would welcome that, and I think we should all welcome that. This is all jobs, prosperity. As it's already been pointed out, I think the vehicle movements coming out of the new estate will all predominantly be travelling and turning right, with the correct road markings and the measures to prevent traffic queuing up on that point. I personally don't think there's going to be an issue. If anyone turns left, it's really just to use those. I would imagine it's just to use those retail outlets, and we've just covered that. I think that's a major bonus. I think there is it's in all probability there's going to be a large amount of commuters living in the development. I guess so. That's part of the attraction of actually living there. So obviously at peak time, you're just going to have a lot of pedestrian activity going to the train station. Again, I think, you know, that it's not going to impact on the roads too much. Maybe if there's people left at home that are not working, they're going to be travelling at a later hour. It's an absolute no-brainer. We desperately need the amount of affordable housing that this scheme will produce. It's a marvellous scheme. As soon as I picked up this report and started reading it, I was getting more and more pleased about what it was offering. I think it's marvellous, actually. Yeah, and actually the distance to the shops, just one other little sort of thing I added at the end here, that all the shops are within walking distance. You know, it may be many occasions probably people wouldn't even get in their car to go shopping. I'll leave it there. I will be voting in favour. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've had Councillor Tandy, then Councillors Watson and Chinnick. Oh. Okay, sorry. Councillor Carter then. Thank you. Apologies.
Yeah, I find this application very exciting, to be honest. It offers quite a lot to the local area. I think with coin flip decisions like this, as was described to us earlier, where it could go either way, with the housing shortage, we should look towards going with them, and then all the affordable housing that this site offers is just a big plus. And I can't see myself voting against a site like this, and definitely going to be supporting this one tonight.
Okay, thank you. Who was next? Sorry, was it Councillor? I'll go Councillor Watson. Thank you.
So I think this is a brainer, and the thing is, I think we really get wound up in the fact that it's 100% affordable, but the affordability in this council is 70% of market rent. That's actually unaffordable for the people of Thurrock. So when we get into that realms, if you were talking about affordability being 50% or 37%, I'll be shouting from the rooftops about that. So intermediate, as if anybody knows, is you have to get a mortgage as well as getting part rent. People have to go and get that product. There's a load of that happening on West Thurrock right at this moment. So I think like the 100% affordability stuff, we need to think about that a bit more, what is really affordable. Because to the average Thurrock person, 70% of market rent, which is round about for a 4-bedroom, £1,800 a month, is not that affordable when you're on 24 grand a year. The actual scheme itself, I think it's a really lovely scheme. I like the way it's set out. I like the way it is. I think where it is wrong. I think that there is an issue with flooding. There's already a lot of flooding going up in that side of the borough. I don't think the flooding strategy has been taken more into consideration. And to be frank with you, it's going to be the ward councillors that's going to have to pick all that up when we know that in Stamford, Councillor Head normally has to pick a lot of that up. So I also think that there will be a lot of standstill and traffic round by the train station because people are going to use it more, which is what we really want to do, to go green travel. But at the same time, I think what it will do is it will just create more traffic anyway. And I don't really want it to be built on a lump of green belt. There's a significant lump of green belt where this could go somewhere else in the borough that is not so much a green belt that they can easily get more planning permission for. So from my point of view, I don't support this, even though everybody thinks it's a no-brainer. I also think that in terms of the shops, there isn't enough up there, really isn't. When you come a ward council where I am at the moment and you see lack of shops and more build going on, I think then you'll probably recognise just how hard it is to be quite isolated with hardly any shops, and then you need a car to get to shops. So from my point of view, I won't be supporting this application. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, no, some really good comments there. And as I mentioned at the beginning, I don't think there are no right or wrong answers here. I mean, just slightly picking up on a few of the comments about the renting, just to clarify, the affordable renting is mainly on I believe it's the apartment complexes, and so it wouldn't be for bedrooms on the rental aspects. And I understand that's also where the zero bills are. So whilst they're still getting, I know it's still expensive, but they don't have energy bills either based on that zero bill. So it's that as well. It's and it's still something. But look, I'm not going to argue with your opinion. Your opinion's valid, and thank you. Councillor Shinnick was next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, for me, this is an excellent scheme, but I must take notice of the 287 letters of rejection, 2 ward councillors rejecting, and the fact that it's on Greenbelt. And for me, I've been up there before now, and it is rather hectic where that crossing is. So for me, I won't be voting for this tonight.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so 2 councillors left. Councillor Tandy, then Councillor Piccolo.
Yeah, I think we should welcome both arms. It's going to be 18th-month build, so it won't cause so much traffic around there. We need houses. Affordability we can obviously look at as well, but I think it's a great opportunity. We should open with both arms open to the companies, and hopefully they build again in the borough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then just finally, Councillor Piccolo.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can understand the local resident and local councillors' concerns, but I think the development from experience of what's happened at the Stamford site, they're good quality. They appear to be good quality. We'll only know in 4 or 5 years' time, but they all seem to be really good quality homes. Yeah, I can understand the traffic. You're saying there's a possibility of 445 cars there. That's a maximum that we're looking at. They're not all going to leave between 8 and 9 in the morning. There's probably not going to be 445 cars on site at any one time. So I have some concerns about the possible backup for when the gates are down, but we spoke about a yellow box provision going in. I think as long as the access and egress from the site is controlled either by yellow box or whatever it is, so that we don't have queuing traffic or traffic being blocked. I think that will solve a lot of the problems. And I say, other than that, we are short of houses. We know we're always going to get this thing about, well, affordability is only 70% or whatever it is. Every application that comes through, yeah, we're going to have the same. We could refuse everything on that assertion alone, because that's all they're going to come to, because it's all they're legally obliged to do. So if you turn around and say we're rejecting this because it's only giving 30% or whatever it is, or 35% affordable housing, then it then goes on to say that, and quite often when we say that's the amount, the developer will come back 9 months later and argue that it's no longer affordable, the site's no longer affordable, and the 35 affordable houses or 35% affordable houses will go back down, the 20%, 10% will be removed entirely. So bearing all that in mind, I think on balance, I'm looking to support this application, because I don't think, I understand the residents' concerns, but I don't think it will have the impact that everybody fears.
Okay, thank you. Right, so we've heard from everyone. Thank you for your contributions there. It looks, obviously, there's 7 of us here this evening. It looks like 5 are in favour and 2 against. So I led that, so I'll recommend the alternative recommendation, which is to approve. Is that seconded? Councillor Carter, with your hand there. Right, Lee, I'd just like to bring you in there, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So just referring to the Council's constitution, which sets out what we need to do in these circumstances. So Constitution Section 7.2 it sets out that if the Planning Committee seek to make a decision contrary to the Planning Officer's recommendation, the following will apply. So first off, the mover of the motion needs to clearly specify the motion, including the reasons for departing from officer's recommendation, and that has to be put forward and seconded. The next part is that the planning officer should always be given the opportunity to explain the implications of what has been proposed. The next part is that if the planning committee's arguments against the planning officer's recommendations are very clear and substantiated, essentially evidenced on planning grounds, the application can be determined at the meeting. If not, the application should be deferred to enable the planning officer to draft a further report for subsequent meeting of the committee, outlining the implications of making a decision contrary to the recommendation. So, Chair, what we'll be looking for is the motion and setting out the rationale and the reasons for departing against, and then we'll need to come to a view as to whether the decision can be made tonight or needs to be a further report.
Okay, thank you. So obviously my recommendation there was for approval. I think first and foremost, if we are going to go against the officer recommendations on the Greenbelt, the first thing we do is we acknowledge that, of course, that there is harm to the Greenbelt, but we're going to come back here with our weighting towards the officer recommendations. So first and foremost, obviously you have the inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, but we've got the delivery of 100% affordable housing there. So you've got I think that's very significant weight that I'm happy to add there. In terms of positive responding to a lack of 5-year housing land supply, again, very significant weight. And as you've seen in the report there, the transport upgrades, the low carbon development aspect, you know, both moderate. And obviously we've got that accelerated build time there of 18 months, which is also moderate. So on those grounds for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just coming back on the low carbon development, so in the report we had, it was originally lifted up to moderate weight because of the amendments. So just to be clear, so the committee is satisfied that that continues to be moderate weight?
Yeah.
Yep, okay, no problem. Thank you, Chair. So I think what we'll be looking to do is draft a further report and bring that back. There was a couple of comments that I picked up, which was around retail impact, around flooding. I think there were some considerations that needed just to be fleshed out, and if we have the opportunity to bring a report back, I think it'd be helpful if we could address those. Also, we have, obviously there's no conditions set out in the report because it's recommended for refusal, but I think it would be helpful for us to have some draft conditions. Case officers will jump in a second, because of course if we bring the report back and the application is approved, it needs to be there needs to be section 106 heads of terms agreed, and also referral to the Secretary of State. So there's a little bit I think we ought to be putting back into the report for members. Yeah. But the case officer wants to come in.
Yeah, just picking up that point, Chair. I think we do. The Constitution says we need to come back with the implications. I think we've clearly recorded your reasons. That's fine. Because potentially we're into referral to the Secretary of State because it's a departure from the development plan, I would like to flesh out planning conditions, because certainly reference has been made to accelerated build. We have covered that in the report. You need to understand the implications, and I would like to flesh out a list of conditions in time for the next report, and heads of terms as well, because I've read out the shopping list of all the things the applicant is offering. Some of them will be material and will be in compliance with the tests, because there are legal tests. Some might not be. So you need to get a full appreciation of what the obligations would be if you take that decision at a later committee, or what the conditions would be. So at that point, if you still go with a recommendation to approve, we'd be in a position to refer to the Secretary of State fairly shortly after. So it's probably doing the work, best doing the work up front, I would suggest. Conditions, obligations, coming back on the reasons, and giving you one package, and then going from there. So I'm guessing, looking at the January the earliest, I'd probably suggest that we'd have to liaise with the agent. It's not going to happen next month. because it's like 3 weeks away, so I don't think it's going to happen next month.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Matt. Absolutely, I think there's all, as we said earlier in the meeting, the agenda is almost published for the December meeting, and Matt's absolutely right. This is a conversation that should be had with the applicant around the wording and the conditions, and we do want to make sure that we bring a comprehensive report back for members for consideration. But clearly, we've listened to the debate, picked up the general feeling in the room for the application, so we'll make sure we capture that in the report.
So we bring that back in
In January,
January.
yeah.
All right, yeah, that sounds fair. Thank you. Are you happy with that, Lee? Yes? You don't need to go legal or anything, no? No. Okay. And then we'll go to the vote, yeah? Okay. All right then, thank you everyone for that. So what we'll do, we'll just quickly head to the vote, but please be aware that we'll have to go away, come back, and probably looking at a January meeting. Obviously, there was an alternative motion there to approve the application with the reasons set out as specified. I recommended that. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Okay, and all those against? You got that, Kenny? Yeah, excellent. Okay then, well thank you everyone. That's the end of the meeting. Thank you for all your attendance here this evening, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. So Councillor Pico, you got your hand raised?
Yeah, Chair, if I could just come in. I know this was missed through, but planning meetings can tend to sometimes go on hold for the 9:30 because of the time. Can we please ensure, if everybody else is in agreement, that the planning committee meetings, as a rule, always start at 6 p.m. to allow us that time and flexibility?
No, I'm happy with that. I do apologise. It was an extraordinary meeting. I'm 100% on board with that. I think officers are as well. So, yeah, with that as a guideline, that's what it will be.
No, I understand, but I just thought if the officers are aware that that's what our wish is, I'm sure they will help with that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Cheers. Thank you.